Chapter 651. Brother Jiang Fan, I understand everything that you've said. Compared to the Azura God King, we are all at a disadvantage. If we are not united when facing the Azura God King, then all three parts of this Empyrean spirit treasure will be taken away by the Azura God King. Brother Jiang Fan, please rest assured. At that time, I will naturally stand out. The bald man smiled and said to Jiang Fan. Jiang Fan also nodded cheerfully. The Universal Law God King is truly sensible. As long as the rest of us are to unite and fight against the Azura God King, the Azura God King would not be able to do as he pleased by relying on his own strength. Then I won't disturb the Universal Law Divine King any longer. Farewell. Jiang Fan slightly clasped his hand, and then walked away from the Universal Law God King's location. He returned to his original location. Sitting in a cross-legged position, Jiang Fan's thoughts were extremely complicated. Of the three parts of the Empyrean spirit treasure, according to the last time the Empyrean mountain descended, these three parts should be the last part of the Empyrean spirit treasure, and should contain the most laws of time. Its power was the greatest. I must obtain the last part of the Empyrean spirit treasure. Thus, the only opportunity to ask the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial to act is to seize the final portion of the Exalted Celestial's spirit treasure. As for the first two times, a portion of the Empyrean spirit treasure that flew out the first time will belong to the Azura God King. However, I will work hard to obtain the second time. Jiang Fan was pondering all kinds of possibilities in his heart. At present, the Azura God King was the strongest among the God Kings on Heavenly Exalted Mountain. That said, although the Azura God King was very powerful, he also caused the many God Kings to feel fear toward him. With so many God Kings joining forces, the Azura God King could at most obtain the first portion of the Empyrean numinous treasure. Take advantage of the first opportunity and gather the strength of dozens of God Kings to force the Azura God King to retreat. By the time the Azura God King retreated, the remaining God Kings present were all about the same in strength. Instead, the 8 great sage emperors were the strongest. Since Brother Zhou Hua and Brother Shen have agreed to help me, then if I can't get the second part of the Celestial Spirit Treasure, According to Jiang Fan's plan, the Exalted Celestial Spiritual Treasure was separated into 3 portions. The first portion would belong to the Azura God King. As for the second and third portions, they would all belong to Jiang Fan. Right now the only variable is Qinyu. Jiang Fan's pupils shrunk. A cold light flashed through his eyes. At this moment, among the God Kings on the Exalted Celestial Mountain, the Azura God King was the strongest, followed by the 8 great sage emperors. If no one else had come in, then Jiang Fan's plan might truly be feasible. However, what about Qinyu? Would Qinyu, whose strength was comparable to the Azura God King's, slaughter his way into the Exalted Celestial Mountain at the critical moment? Space Freeze and Universal Space Force. When these 2 moves were combined, their power would only be stronger than Time Stop. In particular, Qinyu had the godly spear Waning Snow. With such strength, if he were to charge in, that would lead to the unknown. If Qinyu were to help me then? Jiang Fan smiled bitterly in his heart and shook his head. He threw this thought out of his mind. If he wanted to get Qinyu, whose strength was above the 8 great sage emperors, to help him, he would have to be able to turn back time. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 9 years had passed since the descent of the Exalted Celestial Mountain. According to the description on the floating stone slab, every 10 years or so, a part of the Empyrean spirit treasure would fly out. 10 years or so. It was a very vague word. At this moment, all of the God Kings in the ravine of the Exalted Celestial Mountain were in absolute vigilance. They were all prepared to fight over the part of the Exalted Celestial's spiritual treasure that would appear at any moment. Big brother! And Sun lightly shouted. Sun Lian and Lu Lian beside him both looked to the Azura God King Luo Fan, who was standing in front of them with his hands behind his back. Luo Fan was an extremely outstanding leader. He was also someone that Sun Lian and them respected greatly. Sun Lian also frowned and said, Big brother, the situation is bad. Seeing those God Kings conversing with each other, they even glanced at us a couple times. I reckon that many god kings have become on guard against us. They might even attack us together. Luo Fan was still lightly smiling. It was as if he would not be surprised even if the sky were to collapse. Sun Lian, Little and you all do not have to worry. How could I not be able to guess what they are thinking? However, a flock of sheep that are not of one mind would not be able to defeat a wolf. Right now, what I am most afraid of is not them. Instead it is a Qin Yu who has yet to appear. Luo Fan said in a low voice. Qin Yu, Sun Lian, and Sun and Lu Lian were all startled. In the past few years, Qin Yu had not appeared on the exalted celestial mountain. Thus, they all subconsciously thought that Qin Yu would not fight over this treasure. Qin Yu's strength is not weaker than mine. Luo Fan's voice was like a whisper. To be able to withstand 2 of the Thunder Punishment exalted celestials' attacks, even if they were 2 casual attacks. This strength of his is already extremely frightening. Luo Fan knew very well about the battle between Qin Yu and the Thunder Punishment City's God Kings. Later on, there were 2 sudden attacks. Although he did not see who attacked, as long as he had a brain, he would be able to guess. One move single aura 8 elements. The other move was sword energy. 2 moves with such offensive power were not things that any god king would be able to use alone. Will Qin Yu come? Lu Lian was also worried for her big brother. I don't know. Luo Fan let out a low sigh. Regardless of whether Qin Yu will come or not, the first portion of the exalted celestial spiritual treasure will definitely be mine. A sharp glint flashed through Luo Fan's eyes. As time passed, the minds of all the god kings in the exalted celestial mountains canyon became tighter and tighter. Fog City, inside the Purple Mystic Mansion. On the shore of the Purple Mystic Mansion's inner lake, there was a meadow. On the meadow, Qin Yu, Jiangli Kuro, Bai Ling and the others were playing chess and chatting while drinking tea. At this moment, in the sky above the lake beside the meadow, there was an enormous water screen that was 10 meters long and 10 meters wide. On the surface of the water screen was the scene of the exalted celestial mountains canyon. Kuro made his move. Then, he raised his head and glanced at the water screen. On the surface of the water screen, the spiritual treasure origin cauldron was still the same as before. Big brother, it's already been over 9 years. Why hasn't this blue sky seal appeared yet? Kuro was unable to refrain himself from asking. Qin Yu is not in a rush. It will naturally appear when it's time to appear. Pawn checkmate. 1 pawn 1 horse. You're done for. Kuro was startled. After looking at it for a long time, he could only throw away the chess piece and admit defeat. Father, a sharp and clear voice was heard. Qin Yu turned around with a smile on his face. In the distance, a fiery red handsome youngster holding a golden spear in one hand streaked across the sky in the blink of an eye. He flew over to Qin Yu and directly hugged Qin Yu. How was it? Have you been well these days outside? Qin Yu said with a smile. Qin Si was born with the first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure, Fire Origin Spiritual Pearl. His strength was comparable to that of a heavenly deity. Furthermore, because of the Fire Origin Spiritual Pearl, he was able to easily sense the cosmic origin energy and comprehend the spatial laws with ease. In less than 10 years, he was already a high-level heavenly deity. Fire Origin Spiritual Pearl, and this golden spear. 2 first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasures. Qin Si's strength was truly frightening. Those heavenly deities outside are all too weak. There were even some that wanted to rob me. However, I directly set fire to their buttocks. Qin Si laughed mischievously. Qin Yu was unable to refrain himself from laughing. Currently, practically all of the god kings of the divine realm were on the exalted celestial mountain. In the entire divine realm, other than that god king from the western sea's Blood Sea, there were truly not many people that were a match for Qin Si. Little Si. Jiangli walked over with a smile on her face. Mother. Qin Si's eyes shined. He immediately ran over to Jiangli's side. Then, his eyes began to stare at Jiangli's stomach. Mother, when will I have a younger brother or sister? Jiangli's stomach was now bulging again. Evidently, that Lin Ming's prophecy from back then was extremely accurate. Qin Yu did not only have a single child. When will it be? Your younger siblings are better than you. You've stayed in your mother's stomach for 36,000 years. And now, your mother is only 3 months pregnant. Yet her stomach is already this big. I'm afraid that 10 months of pregnancy would be sufficient. Qin Yu said with a smile. This matter was indeed strange. Jiangli had been pregnant for 3 months. Yet her stomach had already bulged a bit. According to this progress, 10 months of pregnancy would be sufficient. Why was there such an enormous difference between the two children? Father, why did that enormous cauldron on the water screen light up? Qin Si suddenly pointed to the scene on the water screen and asked in confusion. Qin Yu, Jiangli, Kuro, and Bai Ling all looked to the scene on the water screen at the same time. At this moment, the totems on the 4 sides of the simple and unadorned spiritual treasure origin cauldron were all faintly moving with light. At the same time, the top of the spiritual treasure origin cauldron had completely lit up. All of the god kings in the ravine stood up. The spiritual treasure origin cauldron has lit up? The blue sky seal is about to be born? Qin Yu had a slight smile on his face. Uncle Lan, do you need my help? Qin Yu directly sent a voice transmission. Inside the ravine of the exalted celestial mountain, all of the 40+ god kings present had stood up. They all looked to the spiritual treasure origin cauldron in the center of the ravine that was emitting light. Hearing Qin Yu's voice transmission, Jiang Lan merely shook his head. Little Yu, the exalted celestial spiritual treasure is something that I am fortunate to obtain. If I am unable to obtain it, then it is my fate. Jiang Lan contacted Qin Yu with his divine awareness and communicated with him. Knowing Uncle Lan's mentality, Qin Yu no longer said anything. At this moment, the 40+ god kings in the ravine were separated into small groups. Each small group consisted of either 3 or 4 people, or only 1 or 2 people. What's going on with this spiritual treasure origin cauldron? A god king asked. The other god kings did not say anything. All of them had experienced the descent of the exalted celestial mountain last time. They all knew that this was the sign that the spiritual treasure origin cauldron was about to spit out the first portion of the exalted celestial's spiritual treasure. Buzz! The spiritual treasure origin cauldron suddenly started to tremble. The light on the surface of the cauldron grew even brighter. Whoosh! At practically the same moment, the 20+ god kings arrived above the spiritual treasure origin cauldron with a whoosh. At the same time, the spiritual treasure origin cauldron also shot out a cyan-colored light. The 20+ god kings simultaneously grabbed at the cyan-colored light. These 20+ god kings were all people who had experienced the descent of the exalted celestial mountain last time. They knew that the trembling of the spiritual treasure origin cauldron was the moment when the first portion of the exalted celestial's spiritual treasure would appear. One of the 3 great god kings of the utmost western flame mountain, Shintunyan, was the first to grab the cyan-colored light. When the cyan-colored light entered his hand, the light immediately disappeared. In the end, it turned into a cyan-colored seal. As for the other 20+ god kings, they immediately charged toward Shintunyan. Humph! Seeing that the others were all chasing after him, Shintunyan directly used teleportation. His figure turned into a blur. However, the white spiritual pearl above the utmost South Sage Emperor Duanmuyun's head shone brightly. Shintunyan's figure was unable to teleport away. Spatial freezing. Shintunyan's expression changed greatly. However, the moment he caught the first portion of the exalted celestial's spiritual treasure, he was already prepared to be besieged. Time acceleration. Shintunyan's speed reached the limit. Like a phantom, he strangely turned into 2 people. The 2 people ran in 2 different directions. Furthermore, these 2 people both possessed Shintunyan's aura. With merely divine awareness, it was impossible to determine who was the real person. Whoosh! 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 The god kings that surrounded Shintunyan attacked at practically the same time. Their attacks were shot toward the 2 figures. One of the figures was instantly destroyed. Shintunyan's true body was frantically running toward the foot of the exalted celestial mountain. Humph! You're also vainly trying to obtain the exalted celestial spiritual treasure? A black whip suddenly appeared in Jiang Fan's hand. It directly coiled toward Shintunyan's true body. Shintunyan's expression changed. Whoosh! The wind suddenly stopped. Jiang Fan, Shintunyen, and the three god kings that approached them all stopped moving. It was as if they had been fixed in place. They were unable to move at all. A graceful figure flew past Shintunyen. The Azura god king Luo Fan was like a graceful painter. His finger gently streaked across Shintunyen's body. The cyan-colored seal landed on Luo Fan's body. PFFF. Blood bloomed like a flower as it sprayed into the vast sky. Shintunyen's body was instantly split into two. Just like that, the two pieces of his corpse fell to the ground. Shintunyen had died. Time stop is truly powerful. On the grassland beside the purple Mystic Mansion's lake shore, Qin Yu, who was watching the battle through the water screen, gasped in admiration. Kuro, little Qin Si, Qin De, Qin Feng, Qin Zheng, and a large group of people were all watching this great battle performed by the God Kings with rapt attention. When the God Kings attacked, each and every one of their attacks were capable of causing the heaven and earth to collapse. Although it appeared simple, once one was hit by their attacks, one would be seriously injured. Beside the exalted celestial mountain, the various God Kings were rapidly flying over. Bang! 7 or 8 rays of light shined in the region where the time stop was located. The time stop was broken. Jiang Fan and them immediately returned to normal. Humph! The Azura God King sneered as he glanced at that group of people. Those who block me die. The Azura God King's arrogant, bloody and grim voice resounded through the entire exalted celestial mountain. As for the Azura God King himself, he was rapidly flying toward the foot of the exalted celestial mountain. That was because the only passage, the relief sculpture tunnel, was located there. As for why he did not teleport, at the moment when the chaotic battle began, the 8 great sage emperors all used spatial freezing, as if they had a tacit understanding with one another. With the 8 great sage emperors joining hands, this spatial freezing was extremely powerful. Even for exalted celestials, they would need to use their exalted celestial's spiritual treasure in order to break through it. As for God Kings, they were simply unable to break through it. Whoosh! Flying at a rapid speed, the wind whistled. Behind the Azura God King Luo Fan were Lu Lian, Sun Lian and Ensun, the 3 great God Kings. These 4 God Kings, with the aura of killing gods and Buddhas, rushed down the relief sculpture tunnel. Wherever they passed, not a single God King dared to block them. However, Luo Fan's flying speed gradually slowed down. His brows started to frown. When he flew to the front of the relief sculpture tunnel, he stopped completely. He was unable to continue onward. That was because there were currently 21 God Kings standing before the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. Among them were 4 sage emperors. When the other God Kings were restricting him, the others had already arrived. Whoosh! 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 Jiang Fan, Jiang Xing, Shintuyen and them also flew over from behind. They flew to the side of the 21 God Kings. After that, Jiang Lan, Zuoqiulin and Yifeng also flew over from behind. One side only had 4 God Kings, whereas the other side was led by the 8 great sage emperors. The difference in numbers was too great. In order to take care of me, Luo Fan, you all actually joined hands. At this moment, Luo Fan still had a light smile on his face. He was not worried in the slightest. Luo Fan, the utmost South Sage Emperor Duanmu Yin said coldly, if you wish to seize the first portion of the exalted celestial's spiritual treasure with your own strength, then you're dreaming. Don't talk about the first portion of the exalted celestial's spiritual treasure. It's extremely awkward. Let me tell you all its name. This cyan-colored seal is called the Blue Sky Seal. The Azura God King held the cyan-colored Blue Sky Seal in his hand and said with a light smile, Blue Sky Seal? All of the God Kings remembered this name. Are you all really planning to stop me? Luo Fan said in a soft voice. Jiang Fan, Duanmu Yun, Zhou Hua and them glanced at each other. In the end, Jiang Fan stood out. With a clear voice he said, Luo Fan, it is not impossible for this Blue Sky Seal to be yours. However, you must agree to a condition of ours. Speak, Luo Fan said directly. Jiang Fan smiled and said, it's very simple. After you obtain this Blue Sky Seal, you are not allowed to fight for the remaining 2 portions of the exalted celestial's spiritual treasure. As long as you swear to the heavens, we will let you go. Those God Kings all had no objections. The powerful strength of the Azura God King was without a doubt. If they were to provoke the Azura God King to go crazy, then many of the God Kings here would die. However, if they were to let the Azura God King go, then he would likely use the same method to fight for the second and third portions of the exalted celestial spiritual treasure. Thus, they could only force him to give up on the remaining 2 portions. Impossible, Luo Fan said directly. Jiang Fan promptly said, Luo Fan, you've already comprehended time stop. This blue sky seal also contains a portion of the temporal laws. Through it, you might be able to comprehend time reversal. At that time, wouldn't you become an exalted celestial? Humph, ridiculous. Luo Fan had a cold expression. It is impossible for me to give up on the remaining 2 portions of this exalted celestial spiritual treasure. In that case, is there no room for negotiation? Jiang Fan, Shen Tiyan, Duan Muyin, Huang Fuyu, Tang Lan and them all had a change in expression. The other God Kings all frowned coldly. At this moment, they must be firm. They must take care of the strongest Azura God King. Otherwise, the other God Kings would not have any chance at all. In the Fog City's purple mystic mansion, Qingyu started to laugh. According to what Lin Meng said, on the day when Little C reaches 100 days, none of the God Kings on the exalted celestial mountain will be able to become an exalted celestial. Naturally, this includes Luo Fan and the 8 great sage emperors. No matter how they fight, they are destined to be unable to succeed. Qingyu felt sorrow for those people. Not knowing their own fate, they were still scheming against each other. On the exalted celestial mountain, all of the God Kings stood together. Even Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin, Yifeng and them were standing in a corner. The ones leading them were the 8 great sage emperors. On the other side were the Azura God King Luo Fan, and the other 4 God Kings. No matter what, I will definitely not give up on this exalted celestial spiritual treasure. If you all truly wish to obstruct me, then today, I shall unleash a massacre. The Azura God King's expression turned cold. A crimson-colored ruler suddenly appeared in his hand. Crimson Ruler Lifebreaker. It was a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure that the craftsman god Cheho Yuan had personally crafted for the Azura God King Luo Fan. It was also a treasure with extremely frightening attack power. Upon seeing this Crimson Ruler, the expressions of the 8 great God Kings all changed slightly. Time stop on top of a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. In order to kill the Azura God King, at the very least, over 10 of the God Kings here would have to die. Zhou Hua, Jiang Fan, Duan Muyin, and the other sage emperors were all using divine awareness voice transmissions to one another. Wait. Zhou Hua suddenly spoke. What else do you have to say? The Azura God King Luo Fan said coldly. Zhou Hua said solemnly. Luo Fan, you are unable to accept that from now on, you will no longer fight for the exalted celestial spiritual treasure. Very well, we'll take a step back. On the day when the second and third portions of the exalted celestial spiritual treasure appear, you are not allowed to fight for it. You are only allowed to fight for it the second day after it appears. What do you think? This plan was already something that the 8 great sage emperors had no choice but to decide. What a joke! Who wouldn't immediately hide the exalted celestial spiritual treasure after obtaining it? If a God King were to hide it, how could it possibly be that easy to find? The crimson ruler in Luo Fan's hand gradually started to shine brighter. Immediately, the expressions of the 8 great sage emperors changed. They were truly going to fight. Chapter 652. On the water screen above the purple mystic mansion's inner lake, the Azura God King and the God Kings led by the 8 great sage emperors were confronting each other. The situation could erupt at any moment. Qin Feng, Qin Zheng, Qin De, Finjiuzi and the others all hold their breaths. The combined might of the 8 great sage emperors is extremely terrifying. Qingyu was also somewhat curious in his heart. Just what kind of trump card does this Azura God King have that he dares to face the 8 great sage emperors head-on? Could it be that this Azura God King truly has some ultimate move that allows him to break through the blockade of the 8 great sage emperors? Xiaoan, Sun Lian, Xiao Lian, the 3 of you listen up. When I make my move, the 3 of you better run as far as you can. The three of you should hide in a corner of the exalted celestial mountain. Don't stick your head out. Also, don't attack anyone. Do you hear me? The Azura God King Luo Fan held the blood ruler in his hand and sent a divine awareness voice transmission at the same time. Big brother. Sun Lian and Sun and Lu Lian all had anxious expressions on their faces. However, no one could change the Azura God King's decision. Moreover, Sun Lian and the other two only needed to think carefully to know what their big brother was planning. If you don't attack them, they won't attack you. As for why they want to deal with me, ever since I obtained the blood ruler, I have yet to truly go on a killing spree. The corners of the Azura God King's mouth rose into a smile. And at this moment, Zhou Hua Jiang Fan Duan Mu Yin, Shen Tiyan Huang Fuyu, Tang Lan, Mu Qin and Pu Tai Hong. These 8 sage emperors moved simultaneously. Among the 8 sage emperors, Zhou Hua, Jiang Fan and Duan Mu Yin formed the 3 talents. Huang Fuyu and the other 5 saint emperors just happened to possess the power of the 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth respectively, forming the 5 elements formation. The spiritual pearls above the heads of the 5 great saint emperors, led by Huang Fuyu, were shining brightly. The 5 different origin energies were fusing together, creating a complementary effect. Brother Huangfu, the 3 of us will block this relief sculpture tunnel. The 5 of you can go and kill Luo Fan. Jiang Fan said directly. With Jiang Fan, Duan Mu Yin and Zhou Hua joining hands, they were capable of blocking the relief sculpture tunnel. Luo Fan was unable to enter. Huang Fuyu, Tang Lan, Shen Tiyan, Mu Qin and Pu Tai Hong smiled confidently. The 5 of them rushed toward the Azura God King Luo Fan, as if they were one. The combined might of these 5 saint emperors, who respectively controlled the power of the 5 elements, was even greater than the combined might of the 6 saint emperors in the South Sea. Swish! Faced with the 5 incoming sage emperors, Luo Fan's body was like a sharp arrow as he rapidly shot backwards. He did not even try to block them. Coward! Huang Fuyu coldly shouted and waved his hand. A 5-colored blade beam shot out from Huang Fuyu's palm. This 5-colored blade beam immediately chased after Luo Fan at an astonishing speed. As Luo Fan's flight path changed, the 5-colored blade light also changed. The speed of the 5-colored blade light was extremely fast. Even though Luo Fan was standing on the blood ruler, his speed was still extremely fast. However, the multicolored blade light was rapidly approaching Luo Fan. Luo Fan's body suddenly drew an arc in midair. He was actually rushing towards the dozen or so God Kings in the distance. The complexions of the dozen or so God Kings changed greatly. They immediately scattered in panic. These God Kings were not familiar with each other. Furthermore, they did not have any formation arrays that could combine their powers. If they were to gather together to face the Azura God King, wouldn't they still end up being slaughtered? Seeing these God Kings leaving in panic, a trace of a sneer appeared on the corner of Luo Fan's mouth. You still want to escape? Stepping on the blood ruler, Luo Fan's speed was much faster than ordinary God Kings. With a turn, he instantly closed in on this group of God Kings. And at this moment, the 5-colored blade light was about to reach them. Luo Fan's speed actually increased by a tiny bit. At the same time, the blood ruler life breaker arrived in his hand. Bang! The blood ruler brazenly came into contact with the 5-colored blade light. At the instant of contact, the 5 complementary origin energies contained within the 5-colored blade light immediately erupted. Merely, Luo Fan did not forcibly block it. Instead, he consciously diverted the energy of the 5-colored blade light toward a certain direction. Bang! Like a blooming firework, the 5-colored origin energies rushed toward the 6 God Kings that were closest to them. The complexions of those God Kings immediately changed greatly. Immediately, one by one, the God Kings began to desperately use their life-saving methods. Bang! The sound of the origin energies colliding with the Grand Mist spiritual treasure sounded. Blood immediately dyed the sky red. Flesh and bones scattered everywhere. There were even God Kings that fell from the sky. After the explosion of the 6 God Kings, the 3 God Kings that were slightly further away, and the one with the stronger strength that was closest to them were only seriously injured. As for the two weaker god kings that were closest to them, they were immediately minced into pieces by the 5 different origin energies. As for the Azura god king Luo Fan possessed the blood ruler to weaken the origin energies. Thus, his body only received a portion of the origin energies' impact. Furthermore, Luo Fan also possessed a set of second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. Thus, he did not receive any injuries from this attack. Not good. Huangfu Yu's expression was somewhat ugly. Brother Huangfu, it would seem that we should not use long-range attacks to deal with this Luo Fan. Luo Fan is able to divert our attacks to attack the other god kings. Mu Qin said with a frown. They had yet to injure Luo Fan. Yet they had mistakenly killed 2 god kings. If this were to continue, how many god kings would have to die in order to kill Luo Fan? Long-range attacks, weak control, and weak attack power. It's better to use close-range attacks. Huangfu Yu could only make this decision. Close-range attacks had their own advantages. Long-range attacks had their own advantages. Once they decided to use close-range attacks, with the flying speed of the Sage Emperors, it would be extremely difficult for them to catch up to Luo Fan, who was standing on the blood ruler. Haha, Huangfu Yu Putai Hong. What are you all doing? You want to admit defeat? Luo Fan stood on the blood ruler and looked to the 5 great Sage Emperors in the sky. He laughed loudly and said, Huangfu Yu and them were all silent on the surface. Brother Jiang Fan. Huangfu Yu directly sent a divine awareness voice transmission. We plan to attack Luo Fan at close range. Merely, in terms of speed, we might not be able to catch up to this Luo Fan. You all should quickly arrange for some god kings to form a great formation array to guard the relief sculpture tunnel. The 3 of you should also come and chase after Luo Fan. Our 2 teams will join hands and attack him from both sides. In this way, the effect would be much better. Jiang Fan instantly made his decision. Good, I'll immediately arrange it. You all pin down that Luo Fan for a while. Immediately after, Jiang Fan looked to the group of god kings beside him. Everyone, that Luo Fan is extremely cunning. We 3 Sage Emperors are also going to chase after him. However, this relief sculpture tunnel must be left to you all. I will now choose 16 people to set up a great formation array to guard this relief sculpture tunnel. What do you all think? At the moment when Jiang Fan was arranging the 16 god kings to set up the great formation array, Huangfu Yu and them continued to chase after Luo Fan. Whoosh! With a whistling wind, Luo Fan turned into a ray of light and rushed toward a god king, the Jade Ripple Lake's Tang clan's Tang Lu. Seeing Luo Fan rushing toward him with a rapid speed, Tang Lu's complexion immediately turned pale. His speed was simply incomparable to Luo Fan's. Big sister. Tang Lu immediately turned to the Tang clan's clan head, the Southwest Sage Emperor Tang Lan, for help. Merely, Tang Lan was currently setting up the 5 elements great formation array. Thus, she was unable to save him in time. Second brother. Tang Lan's expression also changed greatly. Whoosh. At this moment, Huangfu Yu was unable to care about anything else. In a single breath, he created 3 5-colored blade rays. Luo Fan merely sneered. Immediately after, the blood ruler in his hand streaked across a mournful red light. It tore through space and streaked toward Tang Lu's head. When the blood ruler's red light approached him, Tang Lu felt as if his entire body had been fixed. He was unable to move at all. He could only watch in horror as the blood ruler streaked across his neck. No! Tang Lu roared angrily in his heart. However, it was useless. Like a ball, Tang Lu's head rolled down from his neck. The true spirit within Tang Lu's soul was also touched by the red light and directly dispersed. Another god king had died. Whoosh! Luo Fan's speed increased to the limit. Behind him were 3 5-colored blade rays. Just like that, Luo Fan rapidly rushed toward the 2 god kings not far away. When the 2 god kings saw this, they immediately split up in shock and charged in 2 different directions. 2 god kings, Luo Fan could only chase after one. Without even thinking about it, Luo Fan directly chased after the 100 Flowers god king Huangfu Liuxiang of the Huangfu clan of the 8 great divine families. Earlier, that Huangfu Liuxiang was chatting with a hidden god king. Who would have thought that disaster would befall her from the sky? This devil! How did he manage to catch up to me? Huangfu Liuxiang rapidly fled in fear. At this moment, she did not have the slightest bit of calmness. When facing the Azura God King, the only thing she could do was to flee. She did not even have the slightest thought of resisting. Luo Fan frowned. You're running pretty fast. At this moment, the 3 5-colored blade rays behind him were getting closer and closer to him. If he did not block them, the 3 5-colored blade rays would attack his body. Freeze! Luo Fan suddenly shouted. Immediately, the second level of the temporal laws, time stop. The space became completely still. The 5 great sage emperors became still. Huangfu Liuxiang, who was originally flying at a rapid speed, also became still. The 3 5-colored blade rays behind him also became still. The only one that did not become still was Luo Fan himself. Luo Fan was still flying toward Huangfu Liuxiang. Bang! The spiritual pearls above the 5 great sage emperors' heads started to shine brightly. In merely an instant, the time stop was broken. In merely an instant, Luo Fan arrived behind Huangfu Liuxiang. After breaking the time stop, the 3 5-colored blade rays continued to chase after Luo Fan. PFFF. The blood ruler in Luo Fan's hand pierced forward. Huangfu Liuxiang was only able to send out a cyan-colored ribbon. Am I going to die? Huangfu Liuxiang only felt reluctance in her heart. However, when facing Luo Fan's blood ruler, she simply did not have the ability to block it. Bang! A golden sword ray suddenly streaked across the sky and collided with the blood ruler in Luo Fan's hand, causing Luo Fan's attack to become sluggish for an instant. This instant was sufficient for Huangfu Liuxiang to escape from the blood ruler's attack. Big brother! Huangfu Liuxiang saw Huangfu Lei, who saved her life not far away. She was extremely excited. Earlier, Huangfu Lei had only shot out a single sword ray. He was simply unable to make it in time. Humph! A trace of coldness appeared on Luo Fan's face. When facing the 8 great divine families, Luo Fan was never lenient. He once again waved the blood ruler in his hand. So troublesome. Luo Fan's expression changed. The 3 5-colored blade rays behind him were already approaching his body. His body suddenly shifted horizontally. At the same time, the blood ruler in his hand blocked the 3 5-colored blade rays in succession. The 3 multicolored saber lights all exploded. Freeze! At this moment, Luo Fan tried his best to stop time. Merely, the origin energy contained within the 3 5-colored blade rays was truly too powerful. Faced with the flow of time that had stopped time, they only stopped for an instant before continuing to explode. Bang! The explosion was so intense that it even shattered the rocks of the exalted celestial mountain. As for Luo Fan, because he had managed to buy a bit of time with time stop, he was only lightly injured. Luo Fan! An angry shout was heard. Luo Fan's expression changed. Pincer attack. Luo Fan had already noticed that not far away, a long black and white dragon covered with electric snakes was flying toward him. That was the joint attack of Zhou Hua, Jiang Fan and Duan Muyin. The might of this attack was something that even Luo Fan did not dare to underestimate. The relief sculpture tunnel is still blocked. Luo Fan swept through the relief sculpture tunnel with his divine awareness and discovered that the 16 God Kings had formed a great formation array that had completely blocked off the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. Earlier, when the 5 sage emperors were chasing after Luo Fan was still relatively relaxed. However, once the 8 sage emperors split into 2 groups and attacked Luo Fan from both sides, at that time, Luo Fan would truly be miserable. Haha, it would seem that you all have forgotten that I, Luo Fan, was an Azura Devil Path cultivator before ascending to the divine realm. Luo Fan's savage and wanton laughter sounded. That laughter was filled with killing intent. Killing intent filled Luo Fan's chest. The massacre had begun. Luo Fan stood on the blood ruler. His figure was strange. His speed had reached the limit. The 2 groups of 8 great sage emperors were crisscrossing and chasing after Luo Fan unceasingly. Whoosh! Luo Fan passed by a God King. That God King's body was immediately separated into 4 pieces and fell from the sky. Bang! As for the price, it was that Luo Fan received another attack from the 8 great sage emperors. Merely, Luo Fan had relied on Time Stop, the defensive second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure, and the Blood Ruler to counteract the attacks. Every time, he would only receive light injuries. Whoosh! Luo Fan once again streaked past 2 God Kings. One of the God Kings immediately exploded and turned into a mist of blood. As for the other God King, he vomited a mouthful of blood. He had luckily managed to preserve his life. PFFF. Luo Fan also vomited a mouthful of blood. Time and time again, Luo Fan had killed his opponents while being attacked by the 8 great sage emperors. He was simply walking on a tightrope. As such, Luo Fan's injuries were not light. It's about time. Luo Fan looked at the 8 great sage emperors chasing after him. He still had a light smile on his face. The development of the situation was all within his control. Buzz! Suddenly, the entire exalted celestial mountain started to tremble. At the same time, cyan light started to shine. The entire exalted celestial mountain was immediately filled with cyan light. Chapter 653. Episode 18 Chapter 12. Taking a step back on the enormous exalted celestial mountain, the current state of the God Kings was somewhat laughable. 16 God Kings formed a great formation array and stood before the relief sculpture tunnel. There were also several God Kings with weaker strength that were hiding within the relief sculpture tunnel. They feared that Luo Fan would come and kill them. As for Jiang Lan, Zhua Qiulin, Yifeng and close to 10 other powerful God Kings, they were gathered together. They did not fear Luo Fan coming to kill them. Luo Fan did not possess the ability to instantly kill Jiang Lan and them. Moreover, behind Jiang Lan, Yifeng and them was Qin Yu. He was also the person that Luo Fan feared the most. When facing the 8 great sage emperors, Luo Fan could escape with his speed. However, when facing Qin Yu, he would rather offend the 8 great sage emperors than easily offend Qin Yu. This was the plan that Luo Fan had made in his heart. It wasn't that he feared Qin Yu. Instead, it was that he did not possess sufficient certainty in defeating Qin Yu. One must not do things that one did not possess certainty in, unless one was at the end of the rope and had to risk one's life. A misty cyan light illuminated the entire exalted celestial mountain. The 8 great sage emperors and the Azura God King Luo Fan all used their divine awareness to carefully observe the origin of the cyan light. However, as they followed the direction of the cyan light, they discovered that the origin was actually the floating slate. Merely, their divine awareness was unable to reach the floating slate. Thus, they did not know what sort of change had occurred to the floating slate. Everyone, let's stop for now. What do you all think? The Azura God King Luo Fan turned around and looked to the 8 great sage emperors. The 8 great sage emperors looked to each other. There was a trace of anger in their eyes. If it wasn't for the fact that this Luo Fan possessed the Blood Ruler Lifebreaker, his speed would definitely not be able to surpass ours. He would also not be able to escape with his speed. Zhou Hua, Jiang Fan, and them all felt that this was unfair. The 8 great sage emperors were actually unable to catch Luo Fan when they attacked together. Although their combined attack was powerful, Luo Fan's Time Stop, first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure, and the defensive spiritual treasure on his body was more than enough to save his life. If this Luo Fan were to go all out, Jiang Fan's heart trembled. It was impossible for them to instantly kill Luo Fan. If Luo Fan and kill Luo Fan, then the 8 great sage emperors would be killed. Luo Fan would 3 or 4 of them had died. Furthermore, it was up to Luo Fan to decide who would die. The 8 great sage emperors did not wish to die. They did not wish to risk their lives against Luo Fan. Luo Fan, if you have something to say, then say it quickly, Zhou Hua said in a clear voice. At the same time, the 8 great sage emperors all stopped their attacks. The corners of Luo Fan's mouth unconsciously curled into a smile. It was exactly as planned. Let's not talk about our matters in a hurry. Right now, the floating stone slab seems to have undergone some changes. Let's go check out the floating slate first. After that, we can discuss our matter. What do you think? As Luo Fan spoke, he gently swayed the blood ruler in his hand. It was as though he was prepared to attack at any moment. The 8 great sage emperors cursed in their hearts. The Azura God King, who had comprehended Time Stop, was already frightening enough. That Cheho Yuan had actually given the Blood Ruler Lifebreaker, which possessed astonishing offensive power, to the Azura God King. Wasn't this like adding wings to a tiger? Alright, then we'll do as you say. Let's go see what exactly happened to the floating slate. After that, we will settle the matter between you and us 8 great sage emperors. Zhou Hua said coldly. Luo Fan lightly smiled. After that, he waved his sleeve and turned into a ray of light, flying toward the summit of the exalted celestial mountain. The 8 great sage emperors glanced at each other. They all nodded in their hearts. After that, they also flew toward the summit of the exalted celestial mountain. Let's also go and check it out. Yifeng, who had been watching the entire time, also said with a smile. Zhou Qiulin, Jiang Lan, and the other relatively powerful god kings all nodded. This group of people also turned into rays of light and flew toward the summit of the exalted celestial mountain. As for the 16 god kings outside of the relief sculpture tunnel, they did not dare to leave. They were afraid that Luo Fan would flee instead. On the grassland of the Purple Mystic Mansion's lakeside in the Fog City, Qin Yu and them were currently watching everything that had happened on the exalted celestial mountain on the water screen. 8 god kings. In merely a short period of time, 8 god kings have actually died. This Azura God King is truly... At this moment, Kuro was still speechless. They had clearly seen the Azura God King's massacre earlier. In merely a short period of time, 8 god kings had died. This is merely the beginning, Qin Yu said with a light smile. Qin Yu was able to see very clearly that although 8 god kings had died in succession earlier, it did not affect the other god kings at all. This was especially true for the 8 great sage emperors. They practically did not have any reaction at all. For those weak god kings to attempt in vain to get their hands on the exalted celestial spiritual treasure, who could they blame for their deaths? Floating slate? Qin Yu's spatial energy covered the entire exalted celestial mountain. Thus, he was naturally able to hear the conversation between Luo Fan and them. Merely, the spiritual treasure origin cauldron and the floating slate were things that Qin Yu's spatial energy was unable to touch. As for what was written on the floating slate, Qin Yu also did not know. The scene on the water screen changed. Many god kings had flown to the summit of the exalted celestial mountain. They were all looking at the floating slate that was emitting a boundless cyan light. Merely, Qin Yu was only able to simulate a single floating slate. As for what was written on the floating slate, Qin Yu was also unable to determine. Seeing the shocked expressions of Luo Fan, Jiang Fan and them, the content on the floating slate ought to have changed. Qin Yu guessed in his heart. In the past, the floating slate was inscribed with 7 rules. What about now? Exactly what was the content on the floating slate that could cause Luo Fan and them to be so shocked? Big brother, what is written on that floating slate? Kuro asked. Qin Yu shook his head. I also do not know. Dad, you can't see it either? Qin Ci's adorable brows were creased. Qin Yu stroked Qin Ci's little head. He smiled and said, Little C, Dad is not omnipotent. The creator of the exalted celestial mountain was stronger than your dad. Upon thinking of the creator of the exalted celestial mountain, Qin Yu involuntarily thought of Lin Meng. Qin Yu was unable to completely understand the strength of this Lin Meng. However, the small portion of Lin Meng's strength that he had managed to sense was already enough to cause Qin Yu's heart to tremble. Qin Yu's gaze turned to the water screen. What exactly is written on that floating stone slab? Qin Yu frowned. Soon after, he began to carefully listen to the conversation between Luo Fan, the 8 great sage emperors and them. Only by listening to their conversation would he be able to determine what exactly was written on the floating slate. Luo Fan, Zhou Hua, Jiang Fan and them, the 8 great sage emperors, Zhou Qiulin, Yifeng, Jiang Lan and them, and Sun Lian and Lu Lian, the 3 god kings of the Azura Sea. This group of people all raised their heads to look at the floating slate. Several lines of golden words appeared on the floating slate. The exalted celestial spiritual treasure, that the spiritual treasure origin cauldron is nurtured this time around, is called the Living World Seal. The Living World Seal is separated into 3 parts. They are respectively the Blue Sky Seal, Back Earth Seal and All People Seal. The Blue Sky Seal, and the Back Earth Seal possess similar strength. Among the three seals, the All-People Seal contains the most temporal laws and is the strongest. When someone obtains the three seals and fuses them into the Living World Seal, this person will become the new Exalted Celestial. These simple lines of words had caused Luo Fan and them to be suddenly enlightened. Blue Sky Seal, Back Earth Seal, All-People Seal, Luo Fan muttered in a low voice. His eyes were flickering with light. After knowing the strength of the three seals, he was able to change his plan. At this moment, Jiang Fan was secretly delighted. It's exactly the same as I had imagined. The strongest and most important seal is indeed the last part, the All-People Seal. With the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial acting, this All-People Seal is mine. Jiang Fan was filled with confidence. Even an Azura God King was able to cause the 8 great sage emperors to be in such a sorry state. If the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial were to act, who would be able to withstand him? The All-People Seal would definitely belong to him, Jiang Fan. Haha! Suddenly, a loud and clear laughter resounded through the entire Exalted Celestial Mountain. Even the 16 God Kings that were blocking the relief sculpture tunnel started to extend their divine awareness to observe exactly what had happened. Zhouhua, Jiang Fan, I also understand very well the request that the 8 of you have for me. However, it is also impossible for me to give up the Back Earth Seal and All-People Seal. However, if I were to truly risk my life against you all, I, Luo Fan, know my own capabilities. If I were to escape, I would not be able to escape. However, at the very least, half of you 8 sage emperors would have to die. Do you all agree to this? Luo Fan looked to the 8 great sage emperors with a smile. Jiang Fan, Zhouhua and them were silent. Jiang Fan merely nodded his head to express his approval. There was no doubt about this. You all said that I would not fight for the Back Earth Seal and All-People Seal on the day they appear. This request is truly too harsh. How about this? From today until the birth of the new Exalted Celestial, I would not take a single step onto the Exalted Celestial Mountain. What do you all think? Luo Fan looked to the 8 great sage emperors with a smile on his face. The 8 great sage emperors were startled. In an instant, the 8 great sage emperors understood Luo Fan's intention. After this, Luo Fan obtained the Blue Sky Seal. He would not take a single step onto the Exalted Celestial Mountain before the birth of the new Exalted Celestial. Although he would not step onto the Exalted Celestial Mountain, Luo Fan could still wait outside the relief sculpture tunnel. Waiting outside the Exalted Celestial Mountain is not that easy. This Luo Fan is not Qinyu and cannot use spatial freezing. As long as I step out of the relief sculpture tunnel and immediately use teleportation, I would still have a chance to escape, Jiang Fan thought in his heart. The other sage emperors were also considering Luo Fan's proposal. As for Luo Fan, he looked to the 8 great sage emperors with a smile on his face. He was quietly waiting for the 8 great sage emperors' reply. Chapter 654. On the summit of the Exalted Celestial Mountain, the 8 great sage emperors and the Azura God King were confronting each other. Following the Azura God King's words, the situation once again entered a stalemate. Do you agree? The 8 great sage emperors had a headache. We absolutely cannot let Luo Fan go. Once we let him go, there will be no end to our troubles. The utmost West Sage Emperor Shintu Yin said via Divine Awareness voice transmission. His brother Shintu Yin had already been killed by Luo Fan. Towards Luo Fan, Shintu Yin wished that he could immediately kill him. That's inappropriate. Duanmu Yin sent a Divine Awareness voice transmission to the other Sage Emperors. Luo Fan possesses a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure, and also possesses the time stop ability. If he were to go all out, it would be impossible for us to kill Luo Fan, without at least a few of us dying. Everyone who is willing to die. Once Duanmu Yin sent a voice transmission, the various Sage Emperors immediately grew silent. Interesting. This Luo Fan took a small step back, and caused the 8 great Sage Emperors to hesitate. Qinyu, who was watching this scene, had a smile on his face. Who will this Empyrean belong to in the end? Qinyu was curious. According to the mysterious Lin Meng, Even the God Kings on the exalted celestial mountain wouldn't be able to do it on his son's 100th day. In that case, there were only a few possible candidates: Jianglan, Zhou Qilin, Yifeng, Jiang Li Qinyu, and that mysterious Bloodsea expert. Of course, it could also be a new God King that was born during this process. I wonder if what this Lin Meng said is true or false. Qinyu thought in his heart. The way he saw it, this Azura God King Luo Fan possessed an enormous advantage. Jiang Fan Zhouhua, have you two decided? While the 8 great sage emperors were intensely discussing, Luo Fan's voice sounded. Luo Fan still had the same smile on his face as before. He was like a refined scholar. However, those who are familiar with Luo Fan all know how ruthless he is when it comes to killing people. We finished our discussion. As the representative Zhouhua spoke, with a cold expression, Zhouhua said, Luo Fan, we the 8 great sage emperors agree to your request. We can let you go. But from today onwards, until the new Empyrean is born, you are not allowed to take a single step into the Empyrean mountain. Haha, delightful. Luo Fan laughed heartily. Luo Fan, you should swear to the heavens. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for the 8 of us to believe your words. Zhouhua did not give Luo Fan any face and coldly said. Luo Fan didn't mind at all. He smiled and said, That's only natural. I swear to the heavens. After that, Luo Fan directly knelt on the summit of the exalted celestial mountain. With a loud and clear voice he swore, From the day I leave the exalted celestial mountain, until the birth of a new exalted celestial, I will not leave the exalted celestial mountain. During this period of time, I, Luo Fan, will absolutely not take a single step into the exalted celestial mountain. If I do, even heaven and earth will abandon me. Heaven and earth abandon. Heaven and earth abandon. Heaven and earth abandon. The 8 great saint emperors' faces finally calmed down as their voices continued to reverberate through the celestial worthy mountain. I have already made the oath. It is time for you all to carry out your promise. Luo Fan smiled as he looked at the 8 great sage emperors. The 8 great sage emperors took a glance at one another and nodded in their hearts. In the end, Zhouhua, who was the leader, soared into the sky. At the same time, he loudly said to the people below, God Kings below, open up the relief sculpture tunnel and allow this Luo Fan to leave. Leave? No, that won't do. Out of the 16 God Kings in the relief sculpture tunnel, there was a God King who objected loudly. Fellow sage emperors, this Azura God King has killed 8 God Kings in a row. My good brother was also killed by him. A debt of blood must be repaid with blood. Kill the Azura God King, you must definitely kill him. Another God King loudly shouted. However, generally speaking, only a few God Kings were shouting loudly. As for the other God Kings, none of them wanted to become enemies with Luo Fan. Luo Fan had already displayed his strength earlier. Killing ordinary God Kings was as easy as cutting vegetables. Haha, whoever wants to kill me, Luo Fan, feel free to come at me. I, Luo Fan, will receive all of you. The Azura God King Luo Fan said with a loud laugh. His heroic spirit covered the sky. Once Luo Fan said those words, the several God Kings that were shouting earlier all grew silent. Fight against Luo Fan? Earlier, they wanted the 8 great sage emperors to fight. But now the 8 great sage emperors were not fighting. If those God Kings were to fight against Luo Fan, would they be courting death? Naturally, none of them said anything. Of the 16 God Kings, many of them consciously flew away and left the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. After several God Kings left, the other God Kings also flew away. In the end, even the several God Kings that wanted to find Luo Fan for revenge had no choice but to leave and leave the tunnel empty. When Luo Fan saw this scene, he merely sneered in a low voice. Zhouhua Jiang Fan Duanmu Yin, in that case, I shall keep my promise and leave now. Luo Fan lightly smiled. He then stepped on the blood ruler and turned into a crimson ray of light as he flew downward. Sun Lian, and Sun and Lu Lian, the 3 Azura Ocean God Kings, also flew downward. Just like this, under the observation of the 30+ God Kings, Luo Fan and the other 3 God Kings easily entered the relief sculpture tunnel. After that, they disappeared from the observation of all the God Kings. The first portion of the Exalted Celestial's spiritual treasure living world seal, the Blue Sky Seal, was temporarily obtained by the Azura God King Luo Fan. Because of this, Luo Fan also swore an oath that he would definitely not take another step onto the Exalted Celestial Mountain until the birth of a new Exalted Celestial. Humph, the Blue Sky Seal shall be obtained by Luo Fan. The next Back Earth Seal will definitely be mine. Jiang Fan's gaze swept through the surrounding God Kings. Among the remaining people, Jiang Fan believed that he, who possessed the assistance of Zhou Hua and Shen Tian, would be the strongest group. He must obtain the Back Earth Seal. As for the most important All-People Seal, he would let the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial take action. Jiang Fan did not have to worry about that at all. Jiang Lan, look at those 8 great sage emperors. Now that Luo Fan has left, these 8 great sage emperors have immediately separated into 3 groups. Yifeng said with a light smile. Jiang Lan took a glance at them. He nodded and said, Duan Mu Yin, Tang Lan and Mu Qin are one group. Wang Fuyu and Putai Hong are one group. Regardless of how good the relationship between the 8 great sage emperors is, they would still split when faced with the temptation of the Exalted Celestial. Yifeng God King Zhuqiulin. Jiang Lan looked to Zhuqiulin. Jiang Lan was very respectful towards Zhuqiulin. If you have something to say, then say it. Zhuqiulin said impatiently. Jiang Lan smiled and said, As far as I know, Li Er is pregnant again. This time around, it is estimated that she will be able to give birth in 10 months. There's still about 10 years before the birth of the Back Earth Seal. Should we return to the Purple Mystic Mansion first? Pregnant? Zhuqiulin's eyes shined. Immediately after, Zhuqiulin waved her gown. She turned into a blur and arrived at the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel below. Jiang Lan and Yifeng glanced at each other. After that, they smiled and chased after her. The fog city was filled with smoke. It was the base of the 4th ascender power of the divine realm. The master of this place, Qin Yu, was the 2nd God King of the divine realm, to surpass the 8 great sage emperors. Because of the existence of Qin Yu, many people wanted to join the fog city. In merely 10 years, the fog city had become a lot more prosperous. The Purple Mystic Mansion above the fog city was a place that all the residents of the fog city yearned for. Merely, ordinary heavenly deities were not qualified to enter it. Inside the Purple Mystic Mansion, before the water screen, there was originally a large group of people watching. However now, many of the God Kings had left, and the other God Kings were quietly training. Everyone knew that there would be another 10 years of peace. Immediately, many of the Qin clan's descendants left. As for the grassland, only Qin Yu, Jiang Li, Kuro and them remained. Li Er, Uncle Lan, Uncle Yifeng and them have returned. I reckon they'll be here soon. Qin Yu had clearly heard the conversation between the God Kings. Jiang Li lightly nodded. Mother, is the child in your stomach a little brother or a little sister? Qin Si placed his ear on Jiang Li's stomach. He was frowning. It seems like he's moving. Seeing Qin Si acting like this, Qin Yu started to laugh. That's enough. Little Si, go and play by yourself. Don't disturb your mother. Qin Yu said with a smile. Qin Si nodded obediently. Yes, father. After that Qin Si left. After that, Qin Yu, Jiang Li, Kuro and Bai Ling began to chat. Big brother, Fei hasn't returned for a long time. Do you know what he's doing outside? Kuro suddenly thought of Ho Fei. He couldn't help but ask worriedly. With a thought from Qin Yu, the cosmic spatial energy immediately spread out and covered the entire divine realm. Oh Fei, he's still with the 2 ladies. However, it seems that Fei has encountered some trouble. Qin Yu had a trace of a smile on his face. What happened? Kuro immediately asked. Brother Yu, what happened to Fei? Jiang Li also became worried. Bai Ling also looked at Qin Yu. Qin Yu lightly smiled. With a wave of his hand, the scene of Ho Fei, Hong Yun and Zixia together appeared on the water screen in front of them. In the sky above the ocean, amidst the clouds. Ho Fei, Hong Yun and Zixia were above the clouds. Zixia, what did you say? Ho Fei's eyes immediately opened wide. Zixia's face was filled with grief. With her back facing Ho Fei, she said softly, Big brother Huang Yu, you should leave. Don't come looking for me again. In the future, let's not meet again. Ho Fei's face turned pale. Xia, the last time we met, didn't you say that this time, when we meet again we can? Ho Fei looked at Xia in disbelief. Don't say any more. Xia immediately stopped Ho Fei. Big brother Huang Yu, if we're together, we won't have a good ending. Just forget about it. As Xia spoke, 2 lines of tears uncontrollably flowed down from the corners of her eyes. Hong Yun, who had been silent at the side, also had an unsightly expression. Little Huang Yu, don't bother little sister Xia anymore. If this continues, not only will little sister Xia not have a good ending, even you won't have a good ending. We the people of the Blood Sea Palace have no freedom. Hong Yun shook her head and said helplessly, if little sister Xia is really together with you, if the law enforcement team of the Blood Sea Palace comes, then the consequences will be unimaginable. Bullshit. Ho Fei's eyes emitted a faint red light. He seemed to have gone mad. What bullshit Blood Sea Palace? No matter who it is, they can't stop me and Xia. Whoever dares to stop me, I'll smash them to death. Ho Fei went mad. His body turned into an afterimage. In an instant he was beside Xia. He grabbed Xia's hand and stared at Xia with his dark red eyes. However, when he saw the tears on Xia's face, the mad Ho Fei was startled. Xia, you're crying. Ho Fei couldn't help but reach out his hand to wipe away the tears on Xia's face. Big brother Huang Yu, you should leave. Xia forced herself to turn her head and said, not long ago, when Xia and Hong Yun returned, they inadvertently asked the palace master whether the people in the palace could marry people outside. They didn't expect the palace master's attitude to be so firm. It completely shattered their hopes. In the hearts of the people of the Blood Sea Palace, the palace master was the supreme existence. No one could go against the palace master's words. If they did, they would definitely die. Xia, don't worry. I don't care what the Blood Sea Palace is. Whoever wants to snatch you away from me, I'll smash him to death. Damn it. I don't believe that someone would dare to snatch my wife. Ho Fei directly hugged Xia and embraced her. Wife. Xia was stunned. Although the relationship between Ho Fei and her was somewhat intimate, it wasn't to the extent that he would call her his wife. Xia, don't worry. No matter what happens, I'll take care of it. Ho Fei hugged Xia and whispered in Xia's ear. At this moment, Xia felt that her entire body was floating. Her entire heart was intoxicated. If I die in Big Brother Huang Yu's arms, it'll be worth it. Xia thought to herself. Facing Ho Fei's gaze, Xia nodded her head lightly. Ho Fei immediately smiled. His smile was so happy. Xia, you're muddle-headed. You're not only harming yourself, you're also harming little Huang Yu. Hong Yun, who was beside her, was anxious and couldn't help but berate her. Ho Fei frowned. He lowered his head and looked at Xia in his arms. Xia also looked at him. They stared at each other. Xia, I want to tell you something. Huang Yu isn't my real name. My real name is Ho Fei. Ho Fei suddenly said softly. Xia's smile was so bright. She didn't mind at all. She just looked at Ho Fei. Suddenly, Xia, Hong Yun, how dare you go against my orders? A cold voice resounded. A woman with long blood-red hair, blood-red eyebrows, and blood-red robes appeared in the air. She stared coldly at Ho Fei, Hong Yun, and Xia. Chapter 655. Seeing the sudden appearance of this cold woman in a blood-red robe, Xia and Hong Yun's faces instantly turned ghastly pale, without a trace of blood. The two of them trembled in fear, and finally, their legs went soft, and Xia and Hong Yun knelt down. Palace Master. Xia and Hong Yun were so frightened that they couldn't say a word. They knelt down respectfully, and didn't even dare to raise their heads. Their bodies were still trembling. Palace Master? She is the Palace Master? Ho Fei creased his eyebrows. He wasn't scared at all. He sized up the crimson-robed lady who suddenly appeared. Inside the Fog City's purple mystic mansion, Qin Yu, Jiangli, He Yu and Bai Ling were observing this scene through the water screen. At this moment, He Yu was also unable to refrain his shock. Big brother, who exactly is this woman that suddenly appeared? It seems that Zixia and Hongyan think that the woman in the blood-red robe is very terrifying. Jiangli creased her eyebrows. She couldn't recognize the lady with crimson long hair, crimson eyebrows and crimson robe. Such obvious features. As long as one saw it once, they would definitely remember it. Previously, when Qin Yu, Zhuo Qiulin and Jiang Li were in the Blood Sea, the three of them escaped into the new universe when they were attacked by God King Blood Sea. After the three of them disappeared, God King Blood Sea appeared. Hence, they didn't know what God King Blood Sea looked like. Jiang Li wasn't sure, but Qin Yu noticed it. Qin Yu's universe space power covered the entire divine world, and also covered the crimson-robed lady. The special aura that the lady gave out was exactly the same as the aura of the Blood Sea. Could it be that she is the super expert from the Blood Sea? Qin Yu creased his eyebrows and muttered, "Super expert from the Blood Sea?" Jiang Li looked at Qin Yu in shock. Jiang Li naturally understood when the super expert from the Blood Sea was mentioned. The mysterious expert from the Blood Sea could perform time stop. There was no doubt that she was powerful. Who's the super expert from Blood Sea? Kuro and Bai Ling looked over in confusion. A hint of a smile appeared on Qin Yu's face. Xiao Hei, don't worry. Now it seems Fei's relationship isn't all smooth sailing. Things are getting more and more interesting. Let's keep watching. Kuro suddenly smiled. It seemed that his big brother was watching the show. Qin Yu, Jiang Li, Kuro, and Bai Ling all looked at the water screen. On the water screen, they saw Ho Fei shouting at the cold woman in the blood-red robe. Palace Master? Senior, are you the palace lords of Zixia and Hongyan? Ho Fei looked at Blood Sea and bowed slightly. He said senior, but in reality, he didn't show any respect at all. Huang Yu, big brother Ho Fei. Seeing Ho Fei's arrogance, Zixia couldn't help but feel frightened. She repeatedly signaled Ho Fei with her eyes. Zixia even respectfully explained to Blood Sea, Palace Master, big brother Ho Fei didn't know you. That's why he was disrespectful. Please forgive him. Blood Sea only snorted coldly. Forgive? Blood Sea's cold eyes glanced at Ho Fei. Ho Fei felt as though his entire body was being cut by knives. His heart couldn't help but tremble. This palace master seems to be quite powerful. I am Ho Fei from the Fog City. May I know who the palace master is? Ho Fei revealed his identity. After all, he liked Zixia and Zixia was from the Blood Sea Palace. Ho Fei didn't want to make things too awkward with this palace master. Ho Fei also knew about the status of his big brother Qin Yu. The way he saw it, by putting up Qin Yu's signboard, the Blood Sea Palace should give him some face. Ho Fei from the Fog City? The Blood Sea Queen took a glance at Ho Fei. Her eyes were filled with confusion. That's right. May I know if Palace Master knows the city master of my Fog City, Qin Yu? Ho Fei continued to say with a smile. Is there a Fog City in the Divine Realm? The Blood Sea Queen asked with a frown. Among the many cities in the Divine Realm, I have never heard of a city like the Fog City. When was this city built? The Blood Sea Queen looked at Ho Fei. Ho Fei was momentarily speechless. There was actually someone in the Divine Realm who didn't know about the Fog City? Palace Master. This Fog City is a city that was built in the past 10 years. That city master Qin Yu is also an extremely powerful god king. Hong Yun, who was kneeling at the side, immediately raised her head and reported. Hong Yun knew very well that the Blood Sea Queen would usually be bitterly training. Thus, she was not familiar with the matters of the Divine Realm. A city that was built in the past 10 years? This Qin Yu is an extremely powerful god king. How powerful is he? Could it be that he is as powerful as the Azura God King, the 9 Netherworld God King and the others? The Blood Sea Queen directly asked. In the Blood Sea Queen's heart, only the Azura God King and the 9 Netherworld God King were capable of causing her to be on guard. However, when the Azura God King died, the Blood Sea Queen was only slightly concerned about the Azura God King in the entire Divine Realm. This subordinate does not know. However, this God King Qin Yu is indeed extremely powerful. In a great battle, he killed 2 God Kings from the Thunder Punishment City. Hong Yin immediately said. The Blood Sea Queen raised her bloody eyebrows. She looked to Hong Yin. Thunder Punishment City's God Kings? Among the Divine Realm's 8 great sacred lands, only the Thunder Punishment City was capable of causing the Blood Sea God King to feel apprehensive. After all, behind the Thunder Punishment City was an exalted celestial. Having experienced the descent of the exalted celestial mountain last time, the Blood Sea Queen knew very well how frightening an exalted celestial was. He actually dared to kill the Thunder Punishment City's God Kings. The Blood Sea Queen began to pay attention to this Qinyu. Yes, Hong Yun said respectfully. In the past few years, Hong Yun and Zixia had been outside. Thus, they knew a lot about the matters of the divine realm. The two God Kings that Qinyu killed were the Thunder Martial God King Zhou Tong and the Thunder Nightmare God King Zhou Wulian. Zhou Yan also died? The Blood Sea Queen was startled. In the Blood Sea Queen's mind, she clearly remembered the insane youth who indulged himself in massacres on the exalted celestial mountain. Never would she have expected that in the blink of an eye, that insane youth had already died. The Blood Sea Queen looked to Hou Fei. With the Blood Sea Queen's strength, she was able to tell with a single glance that Hou Fei was only a high-level heavenly deity. Actually, there were a lot of maids like Hong Yun and Zixia in the Blood Sea Palace. Thus, she did not care about them at all. However, the Blood Sea Queen cared deeply about her face. She had once said that the women of the Blood Sea Palace were not allowed to marry. Qinyu? The Blood Sea Queen began to ponder. This Qinyu, I have never heard of him before. There was also no God King from 6 quadrillion years ago by the name of Qinyu. Exactly what is the origin of this Qinyu? After that, the Blood Sea Queen looked to Hou Fei. Hou Fei, the Blood Sea Queen said coldly. Hou Fei stood to the side and slightly bowed. He was waiting for the Blood Sea Queen to speak. The Blood Sea Queen continued. Hou Fei, I do not care where you came from. However, the women of our Blood Sea Palace are not allowed to marry. I will give you one final chance. You are to leave right now. In that case, I will spare your life. The reason why the Blood Sea Queen came out from the Blood Sea Palace this time around was precisely for the matter of the descent of the exalted celestial mountain. As for Zixia, Hong Yun and Hou Fei, it was merely a matter of convenience. Because of how mysterious Qinyu was, the proud Blood Sea Queen decided to give Qinyu face and spare Hou Fei's life. Spare my life. Hou Fei was extremely furious. Palace Master, how did you treat Zixia and Hong Yun? The Blood Sea Queen took a glance at Zixia and Hong Yun. Zixia disobeyed my orders and dared to have an emotional association with a man outside the palace. Naturally, she has committed a capital offense. As for Hong Yun, she did not report what she knew. Her freedom will be restricted for hundreds of millions of years as a small punishment. Palace Master, thank you for sparing Big Brother Hou Fei's life. At this moment, Zixia was still kowtowing to express her thanks. At the same time, Zixia looked to Hou Fei and said to him via divine awareness voice transmission. Big Brother Hou Fei, you should quickly leave. No one is capable of disobeying Palace Master. Do not worry about me, quickly leave. Zixia had actually already guessed what the result would be once this matter was discovered by the Palace Master. Merely, in the past, she and Hong Yun had a fluke mentality, because the Blood Sea Queen would rarely come out. However, they never expected that they would be discovered this time around. Hou Fei's expression immediately sunk. Faint red flames were emitted from his eyes. Hou Fei firmly stared at the Blood Sea Queen. Fuck damned woman. Is my Hou Fei's someone that you can kill as you wish? Today, I am truly going to take Zixia away. I shall see what you can do about it. Hou Fei was emitting a tyrannical aura. Big Brother Hou Fei. Little Huangyu. Zixia and Hong Yun were both worried. A high-level heavenly deity wanted to fight against the Blood Sea Queen? Wasn't that simply courting death? Zixia and Hong Yun were so worried that they were about to cry. The two of them were unceasingly using divine awareness voice transmissions to persuade Hou Fei. However, Hou Fei completely ignored them. He only angrily stared at the Blood Sea Queen. An ant trying to shake a tree. The Blood Sea Queen smiled coldly. The Blood Sea Queen waved her sleeve. Immediately, 16 crimson figures appeared beside the Blood Sea Queen. These 16 crimson figures all possessed a strange aura. 16 blood slaves? When Zixia and Hong Yun saw the 16 crimson figures, they were immediately stunned. The legendary strongest group of the Blood Sea Palace had finally appeared. Chapter 656. Inside the Purple Mystic Mansion. These 16 people. Qin Yu frowned. The auras of these 16 people were extremely strange. What shocked Qin Yu the most was that there were actually 2 God Kings among these 16 people. 2 God Kings are actually willing to be her subordinates? Qin Yu was shocked. Even the Azura Sea's 3 God Kings, Sun Lian, and Sun and Lu Lian, although they were the Azura God King's subordinates, were at least nominally brothers and sisters of the Azura God King. As for these 2 God Kings, they were wearing red clothes and acting as respectful as servants. Something's wrong, those gazes. Qin Yu finally noticed the gazes of these 16 crimson figures. Even those 2 God Kings had lifeless gazes. Lifeless? If they were ordinary God Kings, how could their gazes be lifeless? 16 crimson figures, 2 God Kings and 14 high-level heavenly deities. Their gazes were all lifeless. What was the reason? Could they be blood slaves? Qin Yu recalled the words spoken by that mysterious expert from the Blood Sea when he first entered the Western Sea. Back then, that mysterious expert had planned to refine Qin Yu, Jiang Li and Zhuo Qiulin into blood slaves. Qin Yu was unable to refrain himself from becoming alert. In the sky above the ocean within the clouds, 16 crimson figures stood in a row. Their gazes were lifeless. Big Brother Ho Fei, those are blood slaves. Their entire bodies are practically indestructible. You should quickly run for your life. Zixia anxiously sent a voice transmission to Ho Fei. However, Ho Fei stood there. He did not try to escape at all. 13, 14, 15, 16, capture that Ho Fei for me. The Blood Sea Queen said indifferently. Immediately, 4 crimson figures turned into 4 rays of light and flew toward Ho Fei. These 4 blood slaves were the weaker ones among the 16 blood slaves. They were merely high-level heavenly deities. However, once they became blood slaves, they would become practically unkillable. Unless the opponent's attack was truly frightening, it was practically impossible to injure these formless blood slaves. Whoosh! The wind whistled, and the 4 blood-red figures had already arrived around Ho Fei. Ho Fei only smiled coldly. Then, he suddenly let out an angry roar that soared to the sky. A staff shadow suddenly appeared in his hand, and with a sweep of the staff shadow, it hit 4 figures in succession. It's useless. The body of a blood slave is not that easy to break. Seeing Ho Fei attacking with his stick, the Blood Sea Queen had absolute confidence in herself. She even predicted that the rod would be like sweeping through the clouds, unable to harm the 4 blood shadows at all. Bang! The dark cyan single aura staff was surrounded by a stream of air. The dark cyan single aura staff streaked across the sky and fiercely smashed into the 4 blood shadows. The 4 blood shadows howled as if they had received a fatal blow and fell from the sky. When they fell to the ground, the 4 blood shadows directly exploded and turned into ashes. The Blood Sea Queen was startled. She looked at Ho Fei in shock. How is that possible? It is impossible for any high-level heavenly deity to defeat a blood slave, much less kill a blood slave. The Blood Sea Queen possessed absolute confidence in the blood slave she had refined. Ho Fei held the dark cyan single aura staff in one hand and looked to the Blood Sea Queen proudly. What sort of abilities do you have? Go ahead and use them. Let's see what you can do to me. Ho Fei was filled with confidence. Oh, the Blood Sea Queen carefully sized up Ho Fei. After a short moment, the Blood Sea Queen's gaze was completely focused on the dark cyan single aura staff in Ho Fei's hand. Immediately, the Blood Sea Queen's gaze immediately blazed with passion. That weapon, could it be? The Blood Sea Queen's heart trembled. She immediately shouted, go and capture that Ho Fei. Remember, do not use the spatial laws. Give him a chance. The Blood Sea Queen was a bit nervous. If that staff of his is capable of beating back Air's curved blade head-on, then it ought to be a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. The Blood Sea Queen immediately began to carefully inspect the staff. Yes, of the 16 blood slaves, Air and Air were the 2 God King level experts among the 16 blood slaves. These 2 God King level experts had fallen into the hands of the Blood Sea Queen a long time ago, and were refined into 2 blood slaves by the Blood Sea Queen. A black curved blade appeared in Aer's hand. Holding the black curved blade, Aer arrived before Ho Fei in a flash. Holding the dark cyan single aura staff, Ho Fei immediately began to fight against Aer. Occasionally, the curved blade would disappear from his field of vision. Occasionally it would reappear. It was extremely demonic. As for Aer himself, he would frequently use teleportation techniques. Faced with the God King Aer's attacks, Ho Fei was forced into a very sorry state. He could only try his best to block the attacks with the dark cyan single aura staff time and time again. Ah, Ho Fei snarled. The dark cyan single aura staff in his hand was like a flood dragon emerging from the sea, as it swung in all directions. With the teleportation, Aer dodged the attacks. Even without using the spatial laws to restrict Ho Fei, Aer was still able to easily trample on Ho Fei. Bang! The black curved blade collided with the dark cyan single aura staff. Aer's black curved blade trembled. Then it disappeared again. As for the dark cyan single aura staff, it ruthlessly smashed toward Aer with boundless power. Right. The eyes of the Blood Sea Queen, who had been watching the entire time, grew brighter and brighter. She was extremely excited. How many years had it been? What the Blood Sea Queen looked forward to the most was obtaining a powerful weapon. The Azura God King obtained Lifebreaker. However, she, the Blood Sea Queen, only possessed a second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. To the Blood Sea Queen, who possessed the ability to stop time, a second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure was not very useful. What the Blood Sea Queen looked forward to the most was a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. What she yearned for day and night was to obtain a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure that belonged to her. However, there were truly too few first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. The clan protection spiritual treasures of the 8 great sage emperors could only be inherited by the 8 great divine clans. As for the other first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures, they could be counted with one's fingers. The defensive vast territory was indeed a powerful spatial spiritual treasure. However, to the Blood Sea Queen, who was a Blood Sea, the vast territory was of little value. What she needed was an offensive first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. And now, a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure had actually appeared in the hands of a high-level heavenly deity. For it to appear in the hands of a high-level heavenly deity, wouldn't that be equivalent to giving it to the Blood Sea Queen? To be able to completely suppress Aer's Grand Mist spiritual treasure, it is clearly a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. This Ho Fei is truly lucky. Merely from today on, this first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure shall belong to me. The Blood Sea Queen had a grim smile on her face. The Blood Sea Queen ordered indifferently, Aer, stop playing with him. Directly kill this Ho Fei. Palace Master. Xia immediately grew anxious. You want to kill me? Ho Fei licked his lips. He tightly held onto the dark cyan single aura staff that Qin Yu had crafted for him. He was prepared to attack at any moment. Aer's figure appeared. Ya! Ho Fei roared angrily. Holding the dark cyan single aura staff, he planned to attack Aer. Aer coldly stared at Ho Fei. Suddenly, Ho Fei felt that the surrounding space had been completely sealed. The boundless spatial energy had actually compressed him. He was unable to move. Roar! With a roar, the air on the surface of the dark cyan single aura staff started to tremble. The space surrounding Ho Fei immediately started to tremble. Seeing this scene, the Blood Sea Queen became even more excited. Good, what a great Grand Mist spiritual treasure. The better this weapon was, the more she liked it. Chi. The space once again solidified. Ho Fei felt that the spatial oppression had become even stronger. No matter how hard he tried, he was unable to move a single step. When the disparity between them was too great, weapons would become useless. Kill him, the Blood Sea Queen ordered indifferently. The Blood Sea Queen felt that killing Ho Fei was not worthy for her to personally act. He was merely a high-level heavenly deity. It would be sufficient for her to dispatch her blood slave. Whoosh! Hearing the Blood Sea Queen's order, Aer immediately attacked. That black curved blade was hacked out from Aer's hand. It turned into a black ray of light and instantly arrived in front of Ho Fei. Big brother! Ho Fei loudly roared. He only heard chi-chi. As if it had encountered an enormous and frightening obstruction, that black curved blade moved forward a foot with great difficulty. It was unable to pierce forward anymore. After that, Air was unable to move another step. You've restricted my second brother, so I'll restrict you as well. It could be said that we're even now. An indifferent voice sounded. A black-gowned figure appeared in the air. Big brother, you've finally come. Why did you appear earlier? I had already crushed the talisman seal you gave me from the very beginning. However, you insisted on waiting until the final moment. Ho Fei muttered. Qin Yu shook his head and smiled. Fei, you now know the disparity between your strength and others, right? This time around, go back and properly train. Ho Fei smiled at Qin Yu. He then flew over to Zixia and Hong Yun's side. He immediately helped Zixia up and said, Zixia, my big brother has come. It's fine. In the future, you don't have to worry about that palace master. Ho Fei possessed sufficient confidence in Qin Yu. The Blood Sea Queen's expression slightly sunk. Her gaze was focused on Qin Yu. Her ice-cold voice sounded. So you're that Qin Yu? As expected of someone who was able to escape from my time stop. The Blood Sea Queen had already recognized Qin Yu. Oh, so young lady is that mysterious Blood Sea expert. I've finally managed to see young lady's appearance today. Last time, I was scared away without being able to see young lady's appearance. I am truly ashamed, truly ashamed. Qin Yu said with a smile. Young lady. The Blood Sea Queen's expression immediately became even more unsightly. She, the Blood Sea Queen, had existed since the birth of the divine realm. Merely, she had existed as a Blood Sea in the beginning. Later on, she gained intelligence and cultivated to become an extremely exceptional God King expert. With her seniority, how many people were qualified to address her as young lady? As for Zixia and Hong Yun who stood to the side, they were looking at the scene before them in shock. The insufferably arrogant Blood Sea Queen actually did not directly attack Qin Yu. Zixia was unable to refrain herself from asking via divine awareness voice transmission. Big brother Ho Fei, is your big brother Qin Yu truly capable of defeating the palace master? Regardless of whether it was Zixia or Hong Yun, they did not have any feelings for the Blood Sea Queen. The only thing they had was fear. If it wasn't for the fact that they were afraid of the Blood Sea Queen's strength, they would likely have already slipped away. Zixia, Hong Yun, you two can rest assured. With Big Brother here, we will all be fine. Ho Fei said with confidence. Zixia and Hong Yun looked at the confrontation between Qin Yu and the Blood Sea Queen with perturbed hearts. This mysterious Qin Yu or this arrogant Blood Sea Queen? Exactly who was stronger? The Blood Sea Queen narrowed her eyes. With a cold voice she said, Qin Yu, I also know about your ability to escape. Today, I will make things clear. Hand over that Ho Fei's stick, and I will let you all live. As for Zixia and Hong Yun, I can also spare their lives. Do I need you to spare them? If I want to leave, no one will be able to stop me. Qin Yu said with a light smile. The Blood Sea Queen was completely certain. Back then, Qin Yu, Zhuo Qiulin, and Zhang Li managed to escape with teleportation after being hit by time stop. The Blood Sea Queen had been guessing who exactly possessed that sort of remarkable ability the entire time. Right now, from the sound of it, it should be Qin Yu. The Blood Sea Queen immediately sneered and said, Qin Yu, I know that you have a way to escape with them. However, Qin Yu, you must understand that the current you possess a foundation. The Fog City is your territory. Even if you are able to escape now, you will not be able to escape forever. If you are to truly escape, I will directly extinguish the Fog City. What the Blood Sea Queen feared the most was Qin Yu's remarkable ability that allowed him to teleport and disappear even under time stop. Extinguish the Fog City? Qin Yu smiled as he looked to the Blood Sea Queen. Blood Sea Queen, today, I will not escape with teleportation. Instead, I will fight against you openly. What do you think? If you are to lose, then from today on, do not concern yourself with the matters regarding Ho Fei, Zixia and Hong Yun. Not escape with teleportation. A cold smile appeared on the corner of the Blood Sea Queen's mouth. Humph humph, Qin Yu, if you do not escape with teleportation, I can properly fight against you right now. As for Ho Fei, Zixia and Hong Yun, I do not care about them at all. I don't care about Xia and Hong Yun's matters. But that Ho Fei Humph, I must have the stick in his hand. First-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure. The Blood Sea Queen had yearned for it for many years. How could she possibly give it up now? Qin Yu lightly nodded his head. Rod? Oh, you are doing this for a first-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure? Qin Yu immediately understood. The God King's desire for a first-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure was practically the same for all God Kings. The Blood Sea Queen nodded her head. If you are to defeat me today, I will gift you a first-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure. Qin Yu said with a smile. Do you have one? The Blood Sea Queen sneered. Palace Master. Qin Yu is the Divine Realm's new craftsman god. Hong Yun said. Hearing that, the Blood Sea Queen looked to Qin Yu. Chapter 657. The Blood Sea Queen's gaze with which she looked at Qin Yu also contained a trace of shock. Originally, she had thought that Qin Yu was a newly emerged super expert. However, she never would have thought that Qin Yu would be the new craftsman god. That was because even for geniuses, in order to become a Grandmaster Artifact craftsman, they would require a large amount of time and experience to continuously consolidate and increase their abilities. As for Qin Yu, how long has it been since he emerged? Haha, the Blood Sea Queen suddenly laughed. Her crimson-colored long hair fluttered wantonly. Her gown was also fluttering. Qin Yu merely quietly looked at the Blood Sea Queen. Toward this Blood Sea Queen, Qin Yu felt a trace of admiration from the bottom of his heart. To be able to refine a God King level expert into a blood slave, that was not something that an ordinary person could accomplish. Admiration. To the Blood Sea Queen, Qin Yu felt a sort of admiration from a senior expert toward a junior. Ever since he found out about his own path of cultivation, Qin Yu knew that the so-called God Kings and celestial exalted celestials would not amount to much once his cosmos matured. Thus, Qin Yu did not go and fight over the exalted celestial mountain spiritual treasure. The current Qin Yu was safely in the Fog City's purple mystic mansion. As long as others did not provoke him, Qin Yu would not bother to provoke others. That's because at this point, Qin Yu already possessed enough strength to protect himself. Haha, new craftsman god, good. The gaze with which the Blood Sea Queen looked at Qin Yu began to blaze. Her face was filled with an excited smile. Qin Yu, from today onwards, you shall be our Blood Sea Palace's Vice Palace Master. All of the maids and blood slaves in the Blood Sea Palace are yours to enjoy. If you want to give Xia and Hong Yun to your brother, that is also fine. What do you think? Vice Palace Master? Qin Yu was startled. The gown on the Blood Sea Queen's body fluttered with the wind. As for herself, she was laughing loudly. Our Blood Sea Palace is suffering from a lack of good weapons. You, the new craftsman god, is the most suitable. Qin Yu laughed involuntarily. Forcing me to become your Vice Palace Master? Qin Yu smiled as he looked at the Blood Sea Queen before him. Ho Fei, Hong Yun and Xia by the side all maintained their silence. Qin Yu, and an expert of the Blood Sea Queen's level, were able to converse with each other as equals. As for the others, they do not possess the qualifications to do so. I am asking you, are you willing? The Blood Sea Queen looked at Qin Yu. Qin Yu gently shook his head. The Blood Sea Queen did not mind in the slightest. She continued to smile and said, Last time, I also wanted that craftsman god Cheho Yuan to become my Vice Palace Master and refine artifacts for me. Unfortunately, I was stopped by that Azura God King. The Azura God King Luo Fan clearly stated to me that he would protect that Cheho Yuan. Let's see who will protect you this time. Oh, an invitation didn't work, so you're going to use force. Qin Yu was standing in the sky. He was standing on top of a cloud. His hands were crossed before his chest as he smiled and looked at the Blood Sea Queen before him. His eyes were filled with indifferent confidence. There was not the slightest bit of cowardice. The Blood Sea Queen's willow-like eyebrows suddenly narrowed. She sneered. After that, the Blood Sea Queen waved her left hand. The 12 blood slaves immediately turned into 12 crimson figures and flew into the Blood Sea Queen's gown. The Blood Sea Queen extended her slender white jade-like right hand from her gown. Suddenly, A crimson figure appeared around the Blood Sea Queen's body. After that, the crimson figure rapidly shrunk. In the end, it turned into a long trident. Qinyu, this weapon is something that I have refined using my own source energy for tens of millions of years. It is called Blood Trident. Its might is comparable to a second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. The Blood Sea Queen lightly opened her red lips. Confidence filled her face. Qinyu extended his hands to his sides. A layer of gloves immediately appeared on his hands. This glove is called Snowflake. It is a second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. It is also something that I have personally refined. Qinyu's heart was as tranquil as still water. After that, he pointed to the void with one hand and said, "Space freeze." Immediately, in the sky above the ocean, the spatial fluctuations within a circumference of 100,000 miles instantly stopped. The space within a circumference of 100,000 miles was completely frozen. When Qinyu used space freeze, he did not need to use his origin spiritual pearl, like the 8 great sage emperors. Qinyu's soul had absorbed the 8 great sage energies. Thus, using space freeze was incomparably easy. Furthermore, the degree of space freeze had also reached its limit. Space freeze? The ultimate skill of the 8 great sage emperors. How do you know it? The Blood Sea Queen's heart immediately tensed up. Her originally incomparably confident attitude also changed. She became very cautious. Qinyu smiled and did not say anything. Qinyu must admit that this Blood Sea Queen's information was truly lacking. It was likely that she did not care about what was happening in the outside world at all. The battle between him and the God Kings from the Thunder Punishment City had caused such a huge commotion that the great majority of the God Kings knew about it. This Blood Sea Queen actually did not know about it. Humph, so what if you know space freeze? Immediately after, the Blood Sea Queen sneered. Holding the blood-red blood trident in her hand, she turned into a blood-colored illusion and arrived before Qinyu. Qinyu's eyes shined. What fast speed! When the Azura God King Luo Fan stepped on the Blood Ruler Lifebreaker, even his speed was likely inferior to this Blood Sea Queen's. At the same time, Qinyu's hands were like blooming lotus flowers. Countless lotus flower illusions rushed toward the blood trident. The Blood Sea Queen felt as if her blood trident had entered an endless whirlpool. The resistance was growing stronger and stronger. She was simply unable to continue stabbing forward. You want to compete in strength with me? The Blood Sea Queen was so furious that she started laughing. The blood trident suddenly stirred. In an instant, the countless lotus flower illusions shattered like bubbles. In a blink of an eye, the blood trident arrived before Qinyu. Qinyu was unable to refrain himself from crying out in surprise. He immediately used his hands to block the blood trident. Bang! The snowflake gloves collided head-on with the blood trident. Qinyu felt a burst of intense pain in his hands. The intense pain forced Qinyu to rapidly move back to disperse the frightening attack power. This is a second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure? How could it be this powerful? Qinyu looked at the blood trident in shock. His glove Snowflake was also a second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. Why would there be such an enormous disparity between them? Qinyu's new cosmos's spatial power enveloped the Blood Sea Queen. After carefully sensing the Blood Sea Queen's aura, a thought appeared in Qinyu's mind. Earlier, this Blood Sea Queen said that the blood trident was something that she refined using her own source energy. What is her source energy? Qinyu began to guess in his heart. In fact, the Blood Sea Queen's true body was the Blood Sea. As for the Blood Sea, it was born from the boundless ocean of the divine realm. The source energy contained within the Blood Sea could be said to be a type of source energy born from the divine realm's ocean. It was extremely special. If the blood trident were to be used by others, its might would only be on par with ordinary second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. However, when the blood trident was used by the Blood Sea Queen whose true body was the Blood Sea, its might would be much greater. Humph, Qinyu, this palace master did not even use time stop. Yet, you're already admitting defeat? At this moment, the Blood Sea Queen had a smile on her face. She naturally knew the might of her blood trident. No. Qinyu shook his head with a smile on his face. Earlier, I was merely warming up. Qinyu extended his hand. Suddenly, a spear appeared in his hand. The spear was pitch black with a faint dark yellow color. Furthermore, the spearhead of the spear was covered with veins of blood. Qin Yu's first weapon, Divine Spear Waning Snow. When the Blood Sea Queen saw the Divine Spear Waning Snow for the first time, her pupils shrunk. With her eyesight, she was naturally able to tell that the Divine Spear Waning Snow was extraordinary. Furthermore, for Qin Yu to take out the Divine Spear Waning Snow at this moment, it was evident that the spear's might was stronger than the glove. Could it be that it's another first-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure? The Blood Sea Queen thought in her heart. No matter how much imagination the Blood Sea Queen possessed, she did not dare to imagine that the weapon in Qin Yu's hand was much more powerful than a first-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure. Humph, even if it's a first-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure, it still depends on who possesses it. A trace of jealousy and anger emerged in the Blood Sea Queen's heart. Immediately, the Blood Sea Queen shouted. At the same time, the blood trident in her hand started to spin rapidly. Oh, due to the fact that the blood trident was spinning, a crimson-colored vortex was actually formed in midair, with the Blood Sea Queen as the center. The suction power of the vortex grew more and more frightening. What sort of technique is this? Hou Fei was dumbstruck. Hou Fei, Zi Xia and Hong Yin had already flown far away before the battle between Qin Yu and the Blood Sea Queen began. They were able to watch the battle from afar. Qin Yu held the Divine Spear Waning Snow in his hand and stood in midair motionlessly. Whoosh! The blood trident carried with it an endless amount of frightening spinning power, as it ruthlessly whipped toward Qin Yu. Qin Yu merely waved the Divine Spear Waning Snow in his hand in a very simple manner. The blood trident that had been accumulating power for a long time carried with it the spinning power of the vortex. Its power was extraordinarily great. It ruthlessly collided with Qin Yu's Divine Spear Waning Snow, and actually forced the dark and yellow energy within the Divine Spear Waning Snow to fly out. Bang! An intense collision sound. The Blood Sea Queen who was holding the blood trident was like an ordinary person that received an electric shock. Her body started to twitch. At the same time, she was sent flying. Qin Yu took a glance at the unscathed blood trident. Oh, it's actually able to instantly repair itself. Marvelous, marvelous. After receiving the intense rebound from the Divine Spear Waning Snow, a second-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure would generally shatter. Merely, the blood trident was instantly repaired by the Blood Sea Queen's source energy. Thus, it was completely unscathed. The Blood Sea Queen stabilized her body in midair. She looked at Qin Yu with a cold and detached expression. It would appear that I have underestimated you. If you have any techniques, feel free to use them. Don't you have the ability to stop time? Qin Yu looked at the Blood Sea Queen and said with a smile. The Blood Sea Queen sneered. You're also vainly trying to force me to use time stop? Oh. Qin Yu stood to the side with interest. He truly wished to see what other trump cards this Blood Sea Queen possessed. The Blood Sea Queen extended her hand, and the blood trident in her hand disappeared. My most powerful weapon is my undying body. The Blood Sea Queen stared at Qin Yu. Even first-rate grandmiss spiritual treasures would not be able to injure my body. The Blood Sea Queen's true body was the Blood Sea. She was a life form formed by the enormous Blood Sea. In terms of peculiarity, she was even superior to Qin Yu's variant clone. The toughness of the Blood Sea Queen's body had also reached a frightening level. By relying on her undying body, the Blood Sea Queen managed to preserve her life during the descent of the exalted celestial mountain. After training in seclusion for so many years, she even managed to comprehend time stop. Perhaps it might be because her true body was the Blood Sea. But the Blood Sea Queen loved to train in seclusion. A single training session might last for hundreds of millions of years. This was also the reason why she knew so little about the outside world. Oh, the crimson figure arrived beside Qin Yu in an instant. The Blood Sea Queen started to spin. Her right leg was like a whip as it ruthlessly hacked toward Qin Yu with an endless amount of power. Faced with this attack, Qin Yu faced it with a smile on his face. A cyan figure flew out from Qin Yu's body. That cyan figure also sent forth a kick ruthlessly. Bang! The two legs collided. Both of them possessed extremely tough bodies. The sound of the collision was very deep and terrifying. Fortunately, the space was frozen. Otherwise, it would have already shattered. The crimson figure started to move. In the end, she stopped and looked at the black gown Chinyu and the cyan gown Chinyu in shock. This is your clone. Earlier, the Blood Sea Queen had already sensed the toughness of the cyan gown Chinyu's body. The cyan gown Chinyu cupped his hands slightly and said, Blood Sea Queen, the toughness of my body is the thing that I am most proud of. How about we spar and see whose body is tougher? The Blood Sea Queen smiled confidently. The toughness of her body was the thing that she was most confident in. She did not believe that anyone would be able to harm her body. Very well. After she finished saying those words, the Blood Sea Queen immediately arrived before the cyan gown Chinyu. Blade kick, piercing fist, knee strike, she attacked Chinyu in close quarters again and again. Bang! 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 Time and time again, the two of them collided. As if they had gone mad, the Blood Sea Queen's jade-like long legs and jade-like arms appeared. However, her long legs and jade-like arms were as tough as first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. Ah! The cyan gown Chinyu and the Blood Sea Queen separated abruptly. However, the two of them collided with each other at an even faster speed. Bang! With the location of the collision as the center, a frightening collision sound began to spread in all directions. Merely the sound of the collision caused Ho Fei and the others who were watching the battle from afar to be alarmed. TSK. Cracks began to appear on the cyan gown Chinyu's body like shattered stones. The Blood Sea Queen laughed. Her body also started to tremble violently. After that, the Blood Sea Queen's body directly collapsed and turned into a crimson liquid. However, in an instant, that crimson liquid once again turned back into the Blood Sea Queen. At this moment, the Blood Sea Queen's face was filled with excitement. Haha, you've lost. Bang! The cyan gown Chinyu immediately turned into a cyan gaseous substance. However, that cyan gaseous substance once again turned back into the cyan gown Chinyu in a blink of an eye. The smile on the Blood Sea Queen's face instantly froze. Chapter 658. Episode 18, Chapter 17. Sudden change. Some of the experts in the Divine Realm possess clones. However, no matter how tough the clones were, there was a limit. Once the opponent's attack surpasses the limit that the clones could endure, the clones would be destroyed into dregs, collapse and disappear. As for the Blood Sea Queen's true body, it was the Blood Sea. This caused her body to be nearly eternal and indestructible. What she was most proud of was her body. In the entire Divine Realm, she believed that her body's defense was the strongest. However, she did not expect that today, she would encounter an expert whose clone's toughness was on par with hers. Chinyu, you are worthy of my admiration. The Blood Sea Queen stared at Chinyu. However, her expression was extremely tranquil. With an intention from Chinyu, the cyan gown Chinyu turned into a blur and entered Chinyu's body. Chinyu held the divine spear Waning Snow and calmly looked at the Blood Sea Queen. With a smile on his face he said, Blood Sea Queen, I ought to possess the qualifications to make you use time stop, right? The Blood Sea Queen's expression was indifferent. Stop! The Blood Sea Queen looked at Chinyu and lightly opened her red lips to utter a single word. Immediately, the surrounding clouds stopped moving and drifting. Even the undulating seawater below stopped moving. The water droplets from the seawater stopped flying in midair and did not fall down. Complete silence. There was no sound in the entire world. There was no movement. A trace of a smile appeared in Chinyu's eyes. At this moment, Chinyu felt that he was unable to move at all. Time stop was indeed extremely profound. However, Chinyu was not worried in the slightest. Even if he was unable to move, could it be that the Blood Sea Queen was able to move? Chinyu, wouldn't it have been fine if you had admitted defeat earlier? You just had to force me to use this move. The Blood Sea Queen said with a light smile. I also know that you can still escape with teleportation right now. There is a saying in the Dual Domain Islands Buddhist domain. A monk can escape, but his temple cannot escape. If you were to escape, I will go and extinguish your fog. The Blood Sea Queen's voice suddenly stopped. This? The Blood Sea Queen did not have the leisure to be complacent. At this moment, she was completely frightened by her own state. That was because at this moment, she was unable to move. Restriction, oppression, boundless spatial energy directly suppressed and bound every part of her body, causing her to be unable to move. How is this possible? Didn't you use spatial freeze? How can you still use spatial energy to oppress me? The Blood Sea Queen was truly frightened. Unknown things are the most frightening. At this moment, the Blood Sea Queen was completely confused. She couldn't figure out where the spatial power that was suppressing her had come from. Wang. The divine spear waning snow in Qin Yu's hands trembled unceasingly. At the same time, the profound yellow qi on the surface of the divine spear waning snow shaft began to revolve. Bang! It was as if a taut string had snapped. The surrounding clouds could move again, and the waves that had stopped rising and falling began to rise and fall again. The splashing water droplets also calmly fell back down. The sound of waves could be heard again. Time stop had been broken. Qin Yu smiled as he looked to the Blood Sea Queen. At this moment, disbelief and fear filled the Blood Sea Queen's eyes. Blood Sea Queen, your time stop is indeed something that I would need to spend some time to break. Under normal circumstances, that period of time would be sufficient for you to kill me. Unfortunately, even if you can stop me, I am also able to restrict you. While I am able to break your time stop, are you able to break my time stop? An endless amount of new cosmos spatial energy was being transmitted over from the new cosmos unceasingly. The oppression from the new cosmos spatial energy grew stronger and stronger. Regardless of how powerful the Blood Sea Queen's strength was, it was impossible for her to contend against the endless amount of new cosmos spatial energy. Qin Yu, you were not this powerful the last time. With a pale complexion and in a state of shock, the Blood Sea Queen only managed to say those words. Last time, the Blood Sea Queen had planned to use time stop to directly capture Qin Yu, Jiang Li and Zhuo Qiulin, and refine them into blood slaves. Last time, if Qin Yu possessed the strength to resist, how could he have possibly fled in panic? That's right. I did not know how to use time stop last time, Qin Yu admitted with a smile on his face. Blood Sea Queen, weren't you planning to force me to become your vice palace master earlier? Haha. It would appear that you do not have that opportunity now. With a flip of his hand, Qin Yu put away the divine spear waning snow. As for Hou Fei, Zixia and Hong Yun, the three of them flew over from afar. Big brother. At this moment, Hou Fei was extremely happy. Immediately after, Hou Fei ran over to the Blood Sea Queen's side. He winked his brows and looked at the Blood Sea Queen. He even clicked his tongue and praised. Blood Sea Queen, right? Earlier, you were very fierce. What about now? Aren't you just a worm? Haha. Hou Fei returned to his past mischievous self. Humph. The Blood Sea Queen coldly took a glance at Hou Fei and snorted. Her disdain toward Hou Fei was contained within that cold snort. Hong Yun, Zixia. The Blood Sea Queen's gaze was cast to the two of them. Hong Yun and Zixia appeared to be very reserved before the Blood Sea Queen. Even though the Blood Sea Queen had already lost her ability to move, the two of them still felt reserved. Slightly nervous, the two of them respectfully shouted, Palace Master, her accumulated might is too deep. Seeing this scene, Qin Yu sighed in his heart. Even if a tiger had its teeth pulled out, its might was still capable of causing ordinary animals to feel fear. Hou Fei, you can return with Zixia and Hong Yun first. I still have things to discuss with this Blood Sea Queen. Qin Yu said to Hou Fei with a smile. Hou Fei nodded. Humph. A cold snort sounded from the Blood Sea Queen. Qin Yu looked to the Blood Sea Queen in shock. Blood Sea Queen, even now, you're still not cooperating? From how Qin Yu saw it, this Blood Sea Queen did not even have the ability to move. Yet she was still pretending to be arrogant. This was truly too ridiculous. I've said it before. The Blood Sea Queen's gaze swept past Hou Fei, Zixia and Hong Yun. Then her gaze stopped at Qin Yu. If you, Qin Yu, become my vice palace master, I will agree to allow Zixia and Hong Yun to be together with Hou Fei. If you do not agree, then this Hou Fei can forget about being together with Zixia and Hong Yun. Qin Yu laughed involuntarily. Haha, red-haired woman. What are you being so arrogant for? Ho Fei was angered. He pointed at the Blood Sea Queen and scolded. You don't even have the ability to move, yet you still want to forbid me from being together with Zixia? You are truly dreaming. Qin Yu smiled as he looked to the Blood Sea Queen. Blood Sea Queen, although my second brother's words are a bit arrogant, they are also reasonable. Could it be that you still have the ability to stop my second brother from being together with those two women? The Blood Sea Queen smiled indifferently. Qin Yu, to be able to force me to this state, you should be proud of yourself, the Blood Sea Queen said very calmly. Then, the Blood Sea Queen disappeared into thin air. Boom! As if the heaven and earth were collapsing, an endless amount of blood-red-colored seawater started to surge in all directions. There was too much blood-red-colored seawater. It covered the entire sky and covered the earth. Practically in an instant, it covered the sky of millions of miles. Not only did it cover the sky of the Western Sea, it even covered quite a bit of the sky of the Divine Realm's land. An endless amount of blood-red-colored sea. Just like that, it stretched across the sky. Qin Yu, this is the Blood Sea that was born from the Divine Realm's ocean when the Divine Realm was born. The Blood Sea Queen's cold voice sounded from the endless ocean. As long as the Blood Sea does not dry up, I will be eternal and indestructible. Furthermore, the range of your spatial frieze is not small. It has a circumference of 100,000 miles. However, when compared to the range of my Blood Sea, it is much smaller. It is not even a 10,000th of my Blood Sea. The area that my body covers has already surpassed the range of the spatial frieze. The current me is already capable of teleportation. Qin Yu, as long as I am willing, I can destroy your fog city at any time. The Blood Sea Queen's cold voice sounded unceasingly. However, it was also strange. The voice that the Blood Sea Queen let out was something that only Qin Yu was able to hear. Even Ho Fei, Zixia and Hong Yin who were beside him were unable to hear it at all. Destroy my fog city, Qin Yu said with a light smile. I can guarantee that even if you were to destroy my fog city, you will not be able to harm a single person from my fog city. Qin Yu was completely capable of moving the entire fog city into his new cosmos. I believe in that. The Blood Sea Queen's voice was dull. Qin Yu, your strength has won my respect. I agree to not destroy your fog city. As an exchange, you must also agree to not come and disturb my matters. With a thought, Qin Yu managed to guess what the Blood Sea Queen wanted to do. To be able to attract the Blood Sea Queen, other than a first-rate Grandmiss spiritual treasure, it was likely that only the exalted Celestial Mountain was capable of doing so. Blood Sea Queen, I also wish for you to promise me one thing. With a smile on his face, Qin Yu looked to Ho Fei, Zixia and Hong Yun. In the future, you do not have to concern yourself with the matters of the three of them. Haha, what a joke! The boundless sea of blood started to tremble. Earlier, I have already said that I would only agree to not concern myself with the matters of the three of them, if you agree to become my Vice Palace Master. Of course, if you are willing to gift me a first-rate Grandmiss spiritual treasure, I will also not concern myself with their matters. Qin Yu was also slightly angered. This Blood Sea Queen was truly pestering endlessly. Could it be that she thought that a first-rate Grandmiss spiritual treasure was that easy to refine? Fei, you all return first. Zixia, Hong Yun, you all do not resist. Qin Yu's new cosmos' spatial power directly enveloped the three of them. In a state of confusion, Zixia and Hong Yun were sent into the Purple Mystic Mansion together, with Ho Fei by Qin Yu. At this moment, only Qin Yu was facing the boundless sea of blood in the sky by himself. Blood Sea Queen, Ho Fei and the others have already left. What can you possibly do to me? Qin Yu said coldly. From today onwards, don't you even think about destroying the lives of the three of them. The boundless sea of blood started to rise and fall unceasingly. At the same time, the Blood Sea Queen's silhouette appeared before Qin Yu. Anger filled the Blood Sea Queen's eyes. Qin Yu, I, the Blood Sea Queen, have always been one to keep my word. I have already said that unless you gift me a first-rate Grandmiss spiritual treasure, that Ho Fei can forget about being together with the people of our Blood Sea Palace. Qin Yu, could it be that you think that just because Xia and Hong Yun are not by my side, I am unable to control their life and death? Hearing those words, Qin Yu's heart trembled. Not good. Chu Feng recalled the Blood Sea Queen's peculiar ability to refine blood slaves. Even God Kings were able to have their consciousness erased and become puppets under her control. From this, it could be seen how profound the Blood Sea Queen's attainments in controlling people were. This Blood Sea Queen, if she had done something to Xia and Hong Yun. Qin Yu's expression changed. Seeing the change in Qin Yu's expression, a smile appeared on the Blood Sea Queen's face. Qin Yu, why don't you think about it? Even though I know that you possess the ability to teleport people away, why am I still so confident that I can prevent them from being together? Well then, Qin Yu, tell me now, are you willing to gift me a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure? Qin Yu grew silent. Qin Yu's heart was filled with anger. He was extremely unreconciled. In terms of strength, the Blood Sea Queen before him was simply no match for him. However, the Blood Sea Queen's body was the boundless sea of blood. Wanting to destroy the sea of blood was truly too difficult. I fear that before I can destroy the sea of blood, this Blood Sea Queen will have already killed Xia and Hong Yun. Qin Yu felt helpless. In Qin Yu's heart, Hou Fei was like a child that had yet to grow up. He was naughty, mischievous, and irritable. It was rare for Hou Fei to fall in love with a girl. If this girl were to die, how could he face his brother? However, was he truly going to give the Blood Sea Queen a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure? Shui Yun, give me face. In the future, do not make things difficult for Hou Fei, Xia, Hong Yun and the others. Furthermore, do not threaten Qin Yu here. Suddenly, a voice sounded in the Blood Sea Queen's mind. This divine awareness voice transmission caused the Blood Sea Queen's expression to change. There's nothing I can do. I can only agree to her request for now. Qin Yu pondered for a long time. This was the only choice he could make. However, right at this moment, Qin Yu, from today on, do not interfere with my matters. I will also not interfere with Hou Fei, Xia and Hong Yun's matters. Farewell, the Blood Sea Queen said abruptly. Then, the Blood Sea Queen turned into a ray of red light and disappeared from Qin Yu's line of sight. Qin Yu was startled. He was planning to agree to it. Why would the Blood Sea Queen give up? Strange. Qin Yu stood in the air. After thinking for a long time, he was unable to understand why the Blood Sea Queen gave up. Chapter 659. The Blood Sea Queen's sudden abandonment caused Qin Yu to be puzzled for a long time. Since he was unable to figure it out, Qin Yu did not bother to think about it anymore. He directly teleported back to the Purple Mystic Mansion. Inside the Purple Mystic Mansion, it was peaceful and tranquil. Many of the Qin disciples were either sparring with one another, or drinking tea, and discussing the Tao, Utmost Supreme Third Elder. When they saw Qin Yu walking in, many of the Qin disciples beside him bowed respectfully. Qin Yu nodded with a smile on his face. After that, he directly walked toward the location where Hou Fei, Hong Yun and Xia were. After he entered the courtyard that belonged to Hou Fei and the other two all turned around to look at him. Big brother. At this moment, Hou Fei's eyes were filled with excitement. He directly ran over and gave Qin Yu a big hug. After that, he loudly sighed to Qin Yu. Big brother, you have saved my life's happiness. If that Blood Sea Demoness had truly succeeded today, I would have been living a life worse than death. Qin Yu was startled. Soon after, he resisted the urge to laugh in his heart. This Fei is still the same as before. Lil Huang, Hou Fei, what are you saying? Hong Yun opened her almond eyes wide and fiercely glanced at Hou Fei. After that, she turned to Qin Yu and said gratefully, Lord Qin Yu, Hong Yun and my younger sister Xia thank Lord Qin Yu for saving our lives. Qin Yu looked at Hou Fei, then looked at Xia and Hong Yun. He smiled and said, Well then, I will not disturb the three of you here. Lord Qin Yu, that Hong Yun wanted to say something. However, Qin Yu directly turned around and left. Will not disturb the three of us here. Big brother, what do you mean by that? Hou Fei started to frown. He glanced at Hong Yun beside him and muttered, Little sister Xia and I are a couple. It has nothing to do with Hong Yin. Big brother Ho Fei, Xia said in a low voice. Hong Yin frowned slightly when she heard that. However, she soon smiled and said, Little Huang Yu, I have nothing to do with you. Do you think you are your brother Qin Yu? He was merely a high-level heavenly deity. Who would care about him? However, I still have to thank you. Because of you, I was able to escape from the palace master's control. Then Hong Yin looked at Xia and held Xia's hand. She smiled and said, Sister Xia, you should stay with your brother Ho Fei from now on. What about me? Let's play around in the Purple Mystic Mansion for a period of time. If we get tired of it, living in the fog city below isn't bad either. Sister Hong Yin. Xia wanted to say something, but Hong Yin reached out her hand and blocked Xia's mouth, stopping her from speaking. All right, in the future, if I'm not in the Purple Mystic Mansion, I'll be in the Fog City. We sisters will have plenty of time to reunite, and I won't disturb the two of you any longer. Hong Yin smiled and turned around. She didn't even look at Ho Fei and Xia before leaving. Looking at Hong Yin's departing figure, Ho Fei frowned. What's going on? Seeing her leave, why do I feel reluctant to part with her? Could it be that I'm interested in Hong Yin? Hell, what the hell is this? When I see Hong Yin, I want to quarrel with her. How could I be interested in her? Ho Fei thought in his heart. However, Ho Fei's figure suddenly froze, as if he was struck by lightning. His gaze was firmly fixed in front of him. A sparkling and translucent teardrop, like a resplendent pearl, slowly rolled down. It seemed as if it had experienced an extremely long period of time, before it finally dripped onto the stone floor of the courtyard. One could only hear, "Pa!" A crisp and weak sound of impact rang out. That teardrop shattered into several pieces. Ho Fei raised his head again to look at Hong Yin's back. However, Hong Yin had already disappeared from his sight. Ho Fei's face no longer had the playful smile. On the contrary, it was somewhat serious. Brother Ho Fei, you shouldn't have treated Sister Hong Yin like that just now, Xia said to Ho Fei. However, when she saw Ho Fei's expression, she was shocked. The playful Ho Fei rarely had such an expression. Brother Ho Fei, what's wrong with you? Xia asked hurriedly. Ho Fei also woke up. He looked at Xia and deliberately laughed out loud. He shook his head and said, Nothing. I was just thinking about our happy life in the future. That's why I was so happy. Seeing that Ho Fei was still as playful as before, Xia also laughed. However, while chatting with Xia, Ho Fei inadvertently glanced in the direction of the courtyard gate. In the depths of his heart, Ho Fei was also looking forward to seeing that red figure again. The tranquil days were also filled with warmth. Jiang Li's belly grew bigger and bigger day by day. Qin Yu asked about her every day. Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng were also extremely concerned about Jiang Li and Qin Yu's second child. A gentle breeze blew past. The leaves of the trees danced with the wind and gave off rustling sounds. Under the large tree that was as thick as 3 people's arms, Qin Yu, Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng were currently sipping tea and discussing the matters regarding the exalted celestial mountain. That Azura God King was indeed powerful. In merely a short period of time, he managed to kill 8 God Kings. Yifeng took a sip of tea and sighed. Zhuo Qiulin also nodded. As for Jiang Lan, he smiled and said, thinking about it carefully, this Azura God King Luofan had always chosen the God Kings he killed. None of those 8 God Kings were from the Ascender side. Qin Yu was startled. Immediately after, the scene of Luofan killing one God King after another appeared in his mind. Among those 8 God Kings, Qin Yu did not know many of them. He only knew 3 of them. Those 3 God Kings were from the time when Qin Yu first crafted a first-rate grand myth spiritual treasure that attracted the God Kings of the 8 great divine families. The 3 God Kings that Qin Yu knew were all from the 8 great divine families. That's right. Of the 8 God Kings that died, 4 of them belonged to the 8 great divine families. The other 4 were hidden God Kings. Yifeng had lived for a very long time. He was able to distinguish the identities of all the God Kings. Jiang Lan suddenly looked to Qin Yu. Little Yu, I've heard from Li Er and them that not long ago, you fought against a super expert. Li Er and them also saw it through the water screen. Tell me, Who was that super expert? Oh, that super expert was the Blood Sea Queen. Qin Yu directly replied. Blood Sea Queen? Jianglan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng all frowned in confusion. Zhuo Qiulin's eyes suddenly shined. She said to Qin Yu, Qin Yu, you said Blood Sea. Could it be the super expert that used time stop against us last time? Precisely. Qin Yu nodded with a smile on his face. Time stop? You said time stop. Jianglan and Yifeng were both shocked. They both looked to Qin Yu in shock. Qin Yu nodded and said, That Blood Sea Queen is extremely valiant. Her defense is extremely strong. She could be said to possess an undying body. As for her attack, I reckon it's only a bit inferior to the Azura God King's. The Blood Sea Queen was extremely powerful. However, she did not possess an offensive first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. In terms of attack power, she was indeed a bit inferior to the Azura God King. Undying body time stop? Jianglan and Yifeng glanced at each other. No matter how much they thought about it, they were unable to imagine when such a super expert had appeared in the divine realm. Qin Yu's heart moved. He promptly said, Uncle Lan, Uncle Yifeng, according to the conversation I had with her, this Blood Sea Queen's true form is the Blood Sea. When the divine realm was born, there was the Blood Sea. After that there was her. I believe that this Blood Sea Queen ought to have participated in the battle of the exalted celestial mountain last time. Qin Yu remembered very clearly that the Blood Sea Queen had instructed Qin Yu to not disturb her. To be able to cause the Blood Sea Queen to be this concerned, it was likely only the matter of the exalted celestial mountain. Furthermore, this Blood Sea Queen was born a very long time ago. He believed that she ought to have participated in the battle of the exalted celestial mountain last time. Brother Jianglan, do you know? Yifeng and Zhuo Qiulin both looked to Jianglan. Among the three of them, Jianglan was the most familiar with the matters of the past. Jianglan grew silent for a moment. He then shook his head and said, According to what little you said, this Blood Sea Queen ought to be extremely powerful. However, during the descent of the exalted celestial mountain 6 quadrillion years ago, there was not a single Blood Sea Queen among the powerful god kings that were in the limelight. The more powerful one was, the easier it would be for one to be in the limelight in the battle of the exalted celestial mountain. However, Jianglan was unable to affect the Blood Sea Queen in the slightest. Uncle Lan, if you cannot think of it, then don't think about it for the time being. It might also be that my guess is wrong, Qin Yu said with a smile. However, I reckon that this Blood Sea Queen ought to be going to the exalted celestial mountain. At that time, I will identify her to you. Jianglan nodded with a smile. If that Blood Sea Queen is truly as powerful as you described her to be, then why did she not go out to fight for the Blue Sky Seal when it appeared not long ago? I reckon that she was hiding her strength and allowing the Azura God King to become the target of public criticism. Qin Yu slightly nodded. Currently, the Azura God King had already vowed that before the birth of the new exalted celestial, he would not take a step onto the exalted celestial mountain. Once the Blood Sea Queen enters the exalted celestial mountain, she would become the strongest person on the exalted celestial mountain. Time passed. In a blink of an eye, several months had passed. In the courtyard, his royal father Qinda, his brothers Qin Feng, Qin Zheng, Hou Fei Kuro, his elders Feng Yuzi, Jianglan Yifeng Zhuo Qiulin, in short, a large group of people were gathered in the courtyard. Qin Yu was sitting there quietly. He was holding a teacup in his right hand. However, the teacup was slightly trembling. Qin Yu's nervousness and apprehension could be sensed from the slight trembling of the teacup. Beside him, Qinda smiled and patted Qin Yu's shoulder. You've already experienced it once. Why are you still nervous this time? Qin Yu looked to his royal father. He smiled and said helplessly, A bit. I don't want to be nervous. Merely, my hand is trembling uncontrollably. As he said that, Qin Yu would occasionally cast his gaze toward the house. At this moment, his wife was inside the house. Father, do you think that mother will give birth to a younger brother or a younger sister this time around? Qin Si, on the other hand, was very active at the side. Her black, gem-like eyes would occasionally look towards the house. Qin Yu carried Qin Si and placed him on his lap. He stroked Qin Si's head. Little Si, regardless of whether it's a younger brother or a younger sister, you cannot bully them. As his second child had only been in his mother's stomach for such a short period of time, it was likely that his second child would not be as astonishingly powerful as Qin Si. Qin Si wrinkled his little nose. Father, if someone dares to bully my younger brother or sister, I'll poke a hole in his body with my spear. As he said that, Qin Si waved the little golden spear in his hand twice. Qinda, Jianglan, Yifeng and the rest of the people in the surrounding all started to laugh. Wah! A baby's cry sounded. Immediately, the laughter in the courtyard stopped. Qin Yu's eyes shined. With a movement, he had already arrived at the door of the house. Qin Yu already knew that his second child had been born. In a blink of an eye, close to 10 years had passed. Snowflakes fluttered in the sky. Boundless snowflakes sprinkled down from the sky. On the surface of the purple mystic mansion's inner lake were numerous pavilions. Within one of the pavilions, Qin Yu and Jiang Li were wearing a white gown. They were sitting around a tea table. On the tea table was a pot of warm wine. Qin Yu and Jiang Li were drinking the warm wine and watching the snowy scenery in the pavilion. Rumble! The originally tranquil surface of the lake suddenly started to tremble. Qin Yu and Jiang Li raised their heads to look. They saw that a 3-meter-tall wave had suddenly appeared on the surface of the lake. That wave was moving forward unceasingly. Standing on top of the wave was a red-gowned youth. On the neck of that youth sat an adorable child. When Jiang Li saw these two children, she smiled so much that her eyes narrowed. Her face was filled with the radiance of a loving mother. She immediately shouted, "Little Si, little Shuang." The red-gowned youth turned his head around and looked over. The adorable child's eyes shined. With a glance, he saw Qin Yu and Jiang Li. "Father, mother." The child shouted excitedly, "Big brother, quickly go over." The red-gowned youth moved his feet and turned into a red ray of light. After that, he entered the pavilion. After losing the red-gowned youth's push, the wave also collapsed. The surface of the lake gradually returned to its tranquility. "Little Shuang, you're playing around again. Little Si, you can't always play around with your little brother. Your little brother does not have the ability to fly. If he were to fall into the lake, it would be troublesome." Jiang Li immediately lectured. Qin Si had already grown up. He no longer played around like a child. Instead, he was much more sensible. As for Qin Yu's second son, Qin Shuang, he was extremely mischievous. However, this Qin Shuang's cultivation ability was indeed very ordinary. He was about the same as the children of the ordinary divine realm. Ordinary children of the divine realm would need to spend a very long time in order to pass the divine tribulation and become a low-level deity. I wonder how long this little Shuang will have to wait to pass the divine tribulation. Qin Yu could not help but sigh. Compared to little Si, little Shuang's aptitude was much inferior. Chapter 660. It had been 10 years since the birth of the blue sky seal. But the spiritual treasure origin cauldron had not shown any signs of activity. No one knew when the back earth seal would appear. In a pavilion in the center of the inner lake, Qin Yu sat quietly with his legs crossed. As for Qin Yu's soul, it had completely fused with the new cosmos. Currently, the new cosmos was evolving faster and faster. The cosmos was divided into 3 layers. The most complicated layer, the mortal realm cosmos, had already been completed long ago. As for the immortal devil and demon realm cosmos, the energy layer of the cosmos, it had also reached its final stage. Chi-chi, endless amounts of grand mist spiritual energy, surged into the new universe's second layer. Space after space was continuously perfected. I estimate that in another 1 or 2 years, the second level of the new universe will be completely completed. Qin Yu opened his eyes with a smile on his face. He was looking forward to the completion of the second level of the new cosmos. Qin Yu was looking forward to it. He really wanted to know what level his strength would reach once the second level was perfected. The spiritual treasure origin cauldron of the exalted celestial mountain hasn't shown any signs of activity. When will the back earth seal appear? With a thought, Qin Yu's spatial power entered the exalted celestial mountain through the relief sculpture tunnel. In the canyon of the exalted celestial mountain, Jianglan, Zhuoqiulin and Yifeng were still standing together. At this moment, practically all of the god kings in the ravine were on guard. They all knew that the back earth seal could appear at any moment. Compared to the time when they were waiting for the blue sky seal to appear, the number of god kings in the canyon had decreased significantly. Without the Azura god king Luofan, and the 8 god kings killed by the Azura god king. However, there was also an additional god king. Jianglan cast his gaze toward that crimson long-haired woman in the distance. Brother Jianglan, Yifeng asked via divine awareness voice transmission. According to Qin Yu's identification, this crimson long-haired woman is that mysterious expert, a super expert capable of using time stop. Are you truly unable to recognize that crimson long-haired woman? After Qin Shuang was born, Jianglan and them had returned to the exalted celestial mountain. At this place, Qin Yu immediately recognized that this crimson long-haired woman was the Blood Sea Queen. When Qin Yu asked Jianglan whether or not he knew him, Jianglan instead said that he did not. However, as time passed, Jianglan grew a bit uncertain. Jianglan slightly frowned. He seemed to be hesitating. Not certain. Jianglan replied, "You're not sure? If you know him, then you know him. If you don't know him, then you don't know him. Why are you saying that you're not certain?" Yifeng was a bit dissatisfied. Brother Jianglan, if there's anything you want to say, then just say it. Jianglan said via divine awareness voice transmission. Brother Yifeng, this Blood Sea Queen, from merely her appearance and aura, I seem to have never seen her before. But in the past few years, I've often paid attention to her. From her smile, her frown, and her simple movements, I've discovered that she's very similar to an old friend of mine. Old friend? Yifeng looked to Jianglan. My old friend's name is Shui Yin. She is a very quiet and pure girl. Back then, Shui Yin had formed a group with the unfettered God King to fight for the exalted celestial mountain's spiritual treasure together. Jianglan explained in detail. Join hands with the unfettered divine king? Exalted celestial carefree, right? Yifeng was somewhat surprised. That's right. It's just that the unfettered divine king got lucky and obtained the Empyrean spirit treasure, becoming the new Empyrean. As for Shui Yin, he was still an ordinary god king. She had also concealed her identity and disappeared. Jianglan frowned and took a glance at the Blood Sea Queen in the distance. However, the Shui Yin from back then was truly very ordinary. Furthermore, her aura and gaze were not as ruthless as this Blood Sea Queen. I am unable to believe that the Shui Yin from back then, who was as pure as a white paper, would have such an enormous change. Merely, some of her movements were similar to the Shui Yin from back then. That's why I suspected that she was Shui Yin. Of course, it was merely a suspicion. Jianglan said via voice transmission. Yifeng nodded. Brother Jianglan, God King Zhuoqiulin. Yifeng suddenly sent a divine awareness voice transmission to the two of them. Zhuoqiulin also opened her eyes and looked to Yifeng. Yifeng smiled and continued to send a voice transmission. I've thought of something. Now that the Azura God King is no longer in the exalted celestial mountain, in terms of strength, I believe that if the three of us were to join hands, we ought to be quite a powerful force. We ought to have the opportunity to obtain the back earth seal. Zhuoqiulin's eyes shined. When Zhuoqiulin and Jianglan did not possess first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures, their strength was already close to that of sage emperors. Currently, Jianglan possessed the gauze feather blade, and Zhuoqiulin possessed the 10,000 willow scepter. The strength of the two of them definitely surpassed that of ordinary sage emperors. As for Yifeng, he also possessed the first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure vast territory. With the three of them joining hands, their strength would definitely not be weaker than 3 sage emperors joining hands. Right, there's hope. A rare trace of excitement flashed through Zhuoqiulin's eyes. Because the Azura God King is no longer present, the current 8 great sage emperors are not united. Jianglan, Zhouhua and Shintu are in a group. Duanmu Yin, Tanglan and Mu Qin are in another group. The remaining 2 are in another group. The 8 great sage emperors are not united, and that Blood Sea Queen, does not possess a first-rate grandma's spiritual treasure with great attack power. As long as we are careful, there is still hope. Jiang Lan grew silent for a moment. In that case, let's properly plan. Jiang Lan was also looking forward to the Back Earth Seal. Immediately, these three God Kings began to discuss and plan for the Back Earth Seal. Jiang Lan, Shen Tuyen and Zhou Huo were all sitting there calmly. Not long after, Jiang Fan began to look toward the spiritual treasure origin cauldron in the middle of the ravine. The Back Earth Seal that was about to be born in the spiritual treasure origin cauldron was something that Jiang Fan had been looking forward to for a long time. He would first obtain the Back Earth Seal, and then obtain the All-People Seal through the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial. If he were to succeed, then his chances of becoming an Exalted Celestial would be extremely great. Once again, Jiang Fan habitually looked toward the spiritual treasure origin cauldron. Right when he was about to retrieve his gaze like before, he was suddenly startled. That was because he discovered that the spiritual treasure origin cauldron was actually shining faintly. Jiang Fan's eyes immediately shined. Shintu, Zhou Huo, quickly, the Back Earth Seal is about to be born. Jiang Fan immediately reacted and said via divine awareness voice transmission. Jiang Fan did not make any movement at all. He feared that he would attract the attention of the other God Kings. Jiang Fan was hoping that the other God Kings would discover it later. However, the God Kings were all extremely vigilant. The slight change in the brightness of the surrounding light caused all of the God Kings to turn around to look. The Back Earth Seal is about to be born? The eyes of the Blood Sea Queen, who was standing at a corner of the ravine, immediately shined. The Blood Sea Queen had concealed her strength and entered the Exalted Celestial Mountain. The others, for example, the 8 great sage emperors, did not discover her astonishing strength at all. The Blood Sea Queen licked her lips. She glanced at the several sage emperors in the distance. Humph, it's been 6 quadrillion years since we last met. Never would I have expected that not many people would recognize me now. It would appear that my change is truly enormous. However, this is also good. Without attracting your attention, I would be able to obtain the Back Earth Seal even more unexpectedly. The Azura God King was not present. Thus, the Blood Sea Queen was filled with confidence. Chi. The totems on the 4 sides of the enormous spiritual treasure origin cauldron were all faintly emitting light. As for the light above the spiritual treasure origin cauldron, it was even more eye-catching. All of the God Kings stood up. Their gazes were focused on the spiritual treasure origin cauldron. Buzz! Suddenly, the spiritual treasure origin cauldron started to tremble. The light above the spiritual treasure origin cauldron grew even more intense. Practically all of the God Kings present flew toward the spiritual treasure origin cauldron at the same time. Spatial freezing. 5 sage emperors among the 8 great sage emperors used spatial freezing at the same time. Regardless of who obtained the Back Earth Seal, they would not be able to directly teleport into the relief sculpture tunnel. Whoosh! The spiritual treasure origin cauldron suddenly trembled. A grayish-black ray of light shot out with a frightening speed. This grayish-black ray of light was extremely strange. It actually drew a small arc in the air, and then directly pierced into the ground of the ravine. It entered the depths of the Exalted Celestial Mountain. Dumbstruck, the several tens of God Kings that were originally flying stopped in midair. They were also trying in vain to use their divine awareness to penetrate into the Exalted Celestial Mountain. However, the rocks of the Exalted Celestial Mountain were extremely special. The divine awareness of the several tens of God Kings were unable to penetrate through those rocks. Many God Kings spread out their divine awareness and paid attention to all sorts of places. Although they were unable to use their divine awareness to enter the interior of the Exalted Celestial Mountain, they were able to calmly wait for the Back Earth Seal to fly out again. However, after waiting for a long while, the Back Earth Seal actually did not move in the slightest. It was as if the Back Earth Seal was fond of staying in the interior of the Exalted Celestial Mountain. Escape! The Putai clan's God King Putai II shouted in a low voice. He immediately used a special escape technique of the Putai clan. The Putai clan that was most proficient in escape techniques failed this time around. Although Putai II used escape techniques several times, he was unable to enter the back mountain. It would appear that I can only use weapons to excavate the exalted celestial mountain. Jiang Fan frowned. However, upon thinking of the enormous size of the exalted celestial mountain, he asked, "How hard is the rocks of the exalted celestial mountain?" Jiang Fan looked to the rocks on the ground. However, suddenly, bang! A loud sound was heard. A god king brazenly used the enormous axe in his hand to hack at the rocks of the mountain. Numerous small crushed stones were sent flying. A half-meter deep crater was revealed. Evidently, it was not only Jiang Fan who wanted to excavate the exalted celestial mountain. The other god kings also wanted to excavate the exalted celestial mountain. Furthermore, some of them had already started to do so. 80% attack power, yet it only managed to create a small crater. That god king sighed in a low voice. At this moment, Jiang Fan had already realized how hard the rocks of the exalted celestial mountain were. He then looked to the boundless enormous mountain range. With this sort of excavation speed, how long would it take to excavate the entire exalted celestial mountain? Furthermore, the exalted celestial mountain had descended from the sky. Unless they had no other choice, the god kings would not dare to destroy the entire exalted celestial mountain. Huff, huff, huff. One by one, the god kings began to rapidly fly in all directions. Yifeng looked to Jiang Lan and said, "Brother Jiang Lan, the back earth seal is currently hidden within the exalted celestial mountain. The rocks of the exalted celestial mountain are extremely strange. It is impossible for one's divine awareness to penetrate through it. No one knows where the back earth seal will appear from. How about the three of us split up and quietly wait at 3 different locations? We might be lucky enough to obtain the back earth seal. Once we obtain it, we might be able to leave in time." What Yifeng said was actually what many god kings were thinking. If a group of people were to stay in the ravine and wait for the back earth seal to appear, then the person who obtained the back earth seal would likely be the person with the strongest strength. This exalted celestial mountain possessed a circumference of several 100,000 miles. Its height was close to 1,000,000 miles. In such an enormous floating mountain, due to the fact that one was unable to teleport due to the spatial freezing, it would still take a long time to fly. "Brother Yifeng, there's no need to rush," Jiang Lan said with a light smile. "What should be ours will be ours. If it's not ours, then we will not be able to obtain it, even if we were to risk our lives. Furthermore, once the 3 of us split up and go to other locations to wait for the back earth seal, even if we are lucky enough to obtain it, we might still be intercepted by others. Once we obtain it, with the 3 of us joining hands, ordinary people would not be able to snatch it away." Jiang Lan looked to Yifeng. Yifeng smiled and said no more. As for Zuoqilim beside him, she took a glance at Jiang Lan. In the end, she also grew silent. Not many god kings were like Jiang Lan, who did not care about the back earth seal. Those god kings all flew to different locations on the exalted celestial mountain. They were paying attention to the surroundings with their divine awareness. "Shintu, Zhouhua, the 2 of you do not stray too far away from me. Once any one of us obtains the back earth seal, the other 2 can go and provide assistance." Jiang Lan stood in the air. He had completely spread out his divine awareness. Shintu Yen and Zhouhua were both close to 10,000 miles away from Jiang Lan. The 2 of them were also carefully observing the surroundings. As the god kings were carefully searching and waiting, time seemed to be passing by extremely slowly. A cup of tea's worth of time seemed to be as long as 100 years. "Yifeng, look at those god kings, each and every one of them." Jiang Lan smiled and pointed to some god kings in the distance. Whoosh! Suddenly, a gray-black light directly shot toward the ground beneath Jiang Lan's feet. With a rapid speed, it shot toward Jiang Lan. Like a conditioned reflex, Jiang Lan directly grabbed toward that gray-black light. PFFF. His hand trembled. Jiang Lan looked at his hand. A gray-black seal was lying in Jiang Lan's hand. On the surface of that gray-black seal were 3 extremely special words. Jiang Lan was unable to recognize those words at all. However, for some unknown reason, those words naturally appeared in Jiang Lan's mind. "Back Earth Seal. Back Earth Seal." Jiang Lan was startled. Yi Feng and Zhuo Qilin beside him also noticed it. The two of them were also startled. What are you looking at? Quickly, let's go. Jiang Lan suddenly reacted. He immediately sent a divine awareness voice transmission to the two of them. Yi Feng and Zhuo Qilin also reacted. The three of them immediately flew toward the foot of the mountain like 3 rays of light. As for the other god kings that had discovered the back earth seal with their divine awareness, they were currently frantically rushing toward Jiang Lan and them from all over the exalted celestial mountain. Chapter 661. I've finished 2 chapters today. Recently, Tomato's updates have been late, which has made many readers angry. Regarding this, Tomato apologizes first. Tomato's condition hasn't been good recently. He contracted a cough on April 4th, and it hasn't been completely cured yet. Every day, Tomato insists on writing 2 chapters a day. During this period, Tomato is in a sorry state. Really in a sorry state. He promised to update a lot, but he didn't fulfill it. Because of this, he was scolded a lot. Even though he tried to make up for it, he was still called a fake and a hypocrite. It's really sad. Tomato is stupid. He wanted to motivate himself and make himself more motivated. So he promised to update 3 chapters a day. But not long after, he couldn't do it anymore. When he couldn't fulfill his promise, he was scolded. So Tomato apologized and said that he would update 2 chapters in the future. But there were still people scolding that Tomato lacked chapters. I checked carefully and found out that some people were reading the pirated posts. And the pirated posts didn't contain any notice from Tomato. The irresponsibility of the pirated posts website caused Tomato to be scolded. Tomato would update 1 chapter after another. He didn't save any chapters at all. This is a bad habit. Because of some unexpected things, he couldn't update in time. Tomato could only notify and say that he would make up for it in the future. But he was still scolded. They said that he was always taking leave. Tomato couldn't defend himself. Indeed, Tomato had taken leave many times. Later, Tomato worked hard to fill up the chapters. Then he finally had the nerve to ask for monthly votes. At that time, people immediately said that Tomato was pretending to be exploding to ask for monthly votes. They still scolded. Tomato's writing made everyone unhappy, so people scolded again. Tomato's updates were late, so people scolded again. Scolded again and again. In the book review section, many people described Tomato badly. An author once suggested that I hire 2 or 3 readers to manage the book review section. Those negative reviews were directly deleted and banned. That would be better. After all, authors don't have much energy to manage the book review section all the time. But Tomato didn't do that. It's just that some people are very good at fanning the flames. They kept on fanning the flames in one post after another. Tomato was stupid. Why did he promise? Why did he have to make up for it? Tomato's ability to deal with things was really not enough. He only realized it now. But Stellar Transformations is about to end. The exact end date was either April 29th or April 30th. There's still 2 weeks. During this period of time, Tomato had been under a lot of pressure. The coughing didn't stop, but there was only one ending left. Tomato would try his best to write a perfect ending. 2 weeks. Within these 2 weeks, Tomato would finish updating the remaining 30 chapters. After that, Tomato would need to rest for a while. Over the past half a month, due to his physical condition and the constant attacks in the book review section, Tomato was very tired. He really needed to rest, but Tomato would persevere until Stellar Transformation ended. April, the last month of the Stellar Transformation. Tomato was very attached to Stellar Transformations. It had been almost 11 months since the end of May last year. For the past 11 months, there wasn't a day where I wasn't thinking about the plot. Even on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, I was almost completely immersed in the book. Thinking about the plot and typing had already become a habit. Someone said that Tomato had a bad character, but Tomato didn't want to defend himself. Looking at Tomato's update speed, the update on holidays, the update on New Year's Eve. No matter what others said, at least Tomato felt at ease. 11 months. Now that it was the last month, the stellar transformations had also come to an end. I really hope that stellar transformations can have a brilliant ending. In just 11 months, the 24-hour subscription for stellar transformations could be considered the highest. The highest number of subscriptions was over 30,000, and the number of favorites was close to 300,000. The number of clicks was also close to 30 million. Tomato only hoped that in this last month, the monthly votes would be first. That would make the ending of stellar transformations even more brilliant. In this last period of time, Tomato would write every chapter with all his heart, all the way until the end. Tomato would definitely not deliberately slow down at the end. Tomato wouldn't. I'll write at a constant speed until the end of the book. I hope that everyone can make the ending of stellar transformations more brilliant, so that stellar transformations can end with the number 1 monthly votes in the last month. For the next 2 weeks, Tomato would write seriously every day. I also hope that everyone can click on the recommend monthly votes to support the author button below and cast a monthly vote. Thank you everyone. Thank you. Chapter 662. The Back Earth Seal has appeared. The God Kings that covered the entire exalted celestial mountain, with their divine awareness, at all times discovered the appearance of the Back Earth Seal, at practically the same time. Without the slightest hesitation, all of the God Kings unleashed their fastest speed. They turned into several tens of rays of light, and rushed toward their target, Jianglan. From all directions of the exalted celestial mountain, swish, standing on the first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure, Gauze Featherblade, Jianglan's speed had reached an exaggerated level. Even Zuoqiulin and Yifeng were a bit slower than Jianglan. Follow the plan we made, Zuoqiulin said through her divine sense. I know. Jianglan and Yifeng both replied briefly. Fortunately, they had already thought about how to escape from the pursuit of all those God Kings, if they were to obtain the Back Earth Seal. The exalted celestial mountain was truly too big, and those God Kings were scattered too far apart. Only when Jianglan had flown halfway down, did a God King come to intercept him. However, after this God King, even more God Kings hurried over. It would appear that the latter half of the journey would be more difficult. A rare trace of excitement flashed through Jianglan's eyes. How long has it been since I felt my blood boil? At this moment, Jianglan felt as if all of the blood in his body had started to boil. He was filled with an endless amount of energy. Ao Tun, you also wish to stop me? Jianglan directly shouted to the first God King that tried to kill him via divine awareness voice transmission. Ao Tun was one of the 3 great God Kings of the Mount Blood Demon. However, in terms of strength, Ao Tun was much weaker than Jianglan. There was no need to mention Jianglan, who possessed a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. Ao Tun thought of the difference in strength between them. I'm weak. If I go all out, am I going to die? Ao Tun hesitated. This caused his attacks to slow down. Swish! After a curve, Jianglan stepped on the gauze feather blade, and directly left Ao Tun far behind. With Jianglan's current speed, if his opponent were to hesitate in the slightest, he would be able to shake them off. The sound of air exploding rang out. The speed was too fast. Zuoqiulin and Yifeng also followed closely behind Jianglan. The distance between the 3 of them was not far. Who? For God Kings rushed over from the front. Among those 4 God Kings, there were 2 sage emperors. They were respectively Jianglan, Zhou Hua, Zhou Ran and Jiang Xing. These 4 God Kings were naturally the ones that Jianglan was most familiar with. Second brother, give me the Back Earth Seal. Jiang Fan rushed over from the front. Furthermore, he said via divine awareness voice transmission. What a joke. Jianglan said via divine awareness voice transmission. With merely a divine awareness voice transmission, the 2 parties managed to travel several thousand miles and directly meet each other. Jianglan directly rushed into Jiang Xing and Zhou Ran's minds with his divine awareness. The 2 of you also want to block me? Jiang Xing had grown up listening to the legends of Jianglan. Thus, when faced with the cold and murderous Jianglan, who was rapidly charging toward him, he did not have the slightest bit of confidence. He couldn't help but slow down a little, Zhou Ran was a smart person and knew that there was a big gap between them. I'll just follow behind Uncle. Zhou Ran directly followed behind Zhou Hua. I must obtain the Back Earth Seal. Jiang Fan sent his final divine awareness voice transmission. Now, the distance between Jiang Fan and Jiang Lan was only 100 meters. A distance of 100 meters, with the high speed of the two God Kings, would not even be able to blink an eye. A black spiritual pearl was floating above Jiang Fan's head. It was the clan protection spiritual treasure, the Dark Origin spiritual pearl. A black battle outfit appeared on his body. A black spear also appeared in his hand. As for the gauze feather blade below Jiang Lan's feet, it instantly appeared in his hand. Jiang Fan and Jiang Lan looked at each other. Whoosh! The sound of an explosion was heard. Jiang Fan and Jiang Lan passed each other. With an even faster speed, Jiang Lan narrowly passed by Zhou Hua. As for Zhou Ran and Jiang Xing, they did not dare to block him. Zhua Qiulin and Yifeng passed by the four God Kings in 2 arcs. Zhou Hua and them did not stop Zhua Qiulin and Yifeng. That was because Jiang Fan, who was fighting against Jiang Lan, had fallen onto the mountain rocks of the exalted celestial mountain. Brother Jiang Fan, what's wrong? Zhou Hua immediately flew to Jiang Fan's side. There was blood on the corner of Jiang Fan's mouth. He turned around and took a glance below. At this moment, Jiang Lan's figure had already disappeared without a trace. Merely, he could faintly hear the frightening sound of explosions and collisions. Evidently, there was another battle below. I'm fine. Jiang Fan shook his head. His pupils shrunk slightly. Merely, I never would have expected that my second brother actually managed to use time acceleration to such a level of perfection. His near-ultimate usage of time acceleration actually caused my origin energy to be unable to injure him at all. Instead, he managed to land a slash on me. Thinking about it, Jiang Fan still felt a burst of fear. If it wasn't for the fact that his clan protection spiritual treasure, the Dark Origin spiritual pearl, possessed a defensive effect, then Jiang Fan, who was struck by the gauze feather blade, would likely not have merely vomited a mouthful of blood. That powerful? Zhou Hua was also surprised. I already knew that my second brother was very powerful. Back then, he did not possess a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. At that time, when I faced him, I did not possess absolute certainty in being able to defeat him. Now that he possesses the gauze feather blade, I am no longer a match for him. Jiang Fan felt a bit regretful. That was because the gauze feather blade was given to Jiang Lan by Jiang Fan. Back then, during the public groom search, the first gift that Qin Yu presented was the gauze feather blade. At that time, Jiang Fan had decided to give the gauze feather blade to Jiang Lan for the sake of increasing the strength of the floating snow city. Who would have thought that when it came time to choose a son-in-law, he chose Zhou Hua. This caused Jiang Lan to completely fall out with him. The gauze feather blade that Qin Yu gave to Jiang Fan was returned to Jiang Lan in the end. This was a sort of balance. Once he thought of Qin Yu, Jiang Fan felt a burst of irritation. No matter what, I must obtain this Back Earth Seal. Jiang Fan once again soared into the sky. Brother Jiang Fan, you still want to chase after him? Zhou Hua beside him was surprised. Jiang Xing and Zhou Ran also looked to Jiang Fan. They were all able to sense Jiang Lan's flying speed. Jiang Lan's flying speed was faster than theirs. If they were to chase after him, the distance between them would only grow larger and larger. It was simply impossible for them to catch up. Jiang Fan said via divine awareness voice transmission. Don't worry, there are people blocking their path. They will definitely not be able to maintain their high speed forever. Furthermore, there are people blocking the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. There is only a single exit in the entire exalted celestial mountain, the relief sculpture tunnel. It is impossible for my second brother to leave that easily. Jiang Fan's words resounded in Zhou Hua, Zhou Ran and Jiang Xing's minds. As for Jiang Fan, he turned into a ray of black light and chased after them. Zhou Hua, Zhou Ran and Jiang Xing hesitated for a moment. However, they also chased after Jiang Fan. Brother Jiang Lan, stop. Numerous divine awareness voice transmissions sounded in Jiang Lan's mind unceasingly. The majority of those divine awareness voice transmissions were Jiang Lan's old acquaintances. Many of them possessed a pretty good relationship with Jiang Lan. However, when it came to the back earth seal, those god kings would not act modestly. Stop! Jiang Lan's eyes contained a trace of coldness. Many god kings possessed a pretty good relationship with him in the past. However, when they fought against him earlier, several god kings that he was familiar with still attacked him ruthlessly, without the slightest bit of mercy. At this moment, Jiang Lan's cyan gown was also dyed with bloodstains. Those bloodstains were both his and other people's. I do not seek to kill my enemies. I merely seek to reach the bottom with the fastest speed possible. This was Jiang Lan's idea. This was also the reason why Jiang Lan had never used any killing moves against those god kings. He merely wanted to shake them off. With his flying speed, as long as he shook them off, they would not be able to catch up to him. In terms of speed, Jiang Lan, who stood on the first-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure, the gauze feather blade, might only be comparable to the Azura God King from back then. After all, none of the 8 Great Clan Protection Spiritual Treasures were flying spiritual treasures. Although the 8 Great Sage Emperors also possess first-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasures, their speed was still a bit slower than Jiang Lan's. Whoosh! Whoosh! Zhua Qiulin and Yi Feng took a detour and rapidly flew toward the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. The two of them were extremely relaxed. On their way there, not a single god king came to stop them. Practically all of the god kings had gone to stop Jiang Lan. Brother Jiang Lan's speed in shaking off those god kings is pretty fast. Yi Feng had a joyous expression on his face. Zhua Qiulin still had a cold expression on her face. She directly said via divine awareness voice transmission, "Humph, merely those god kings are not united. Furthermore, the majority of the truly powerful god kings have yet to act. There are already several sage emperors waiting at the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel." Yi Feng's expression also grew solemn. What those sage emperors thought was extremely simple. No matter what, Jiang Lan would still have to leave through the relief sculpture tunnel. Thus, by blocking the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel, they would be able to stop Jiang Lan. Whoosh! An unremarkable crimson-colored ray of light flew to several hundred meters away from the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. The crimson-colored ray of light stopped and turned into a human figure. It was the Blood Sea Queen. When the Blood Sea Queen discovered that the back earth seal had been obtained by Jiang Lan, she immediately flew toward the relief sculpture tunnel with all her strength. No one obstructed her the entire way. Adding on the fact that her speed was extremely fast, the Blood Sea Queen had already arrived at the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel before Jiang Lan. Humph! Those sage emperors truly thought themselves to be very powerful. The Blood Sea Queen took a glance at Duan Muyin, Tang Lan, Huang Fuyu and them who were standing in front of the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. "I'll have you all fight against Jiang Lan and them first. After that." The Blood Sea Queen's plan was extremely good. Although her strength was pretty good, she would still be in danger if she were to face the several sage emperors, Jiang Lan and them. Most importantly, those sage emperors did not know of her strength at all. Conceal her strength. Attack at the crucial moment. Pooh! The gauze feather blade streaked across the sky with a trace of blood. Standing on the gauze feather blade, Jiang Lan's speed slowed down a bit. Then he returned to his peak speed. He continued to fly downward. Behind Jiang Lan, the God King Huang Fulei was looking at Jiang Lan's back from afar. He knew very well that Jiang Lan had already spared his life earlier. If Jiang Lan were to spend a bit more time, he would be able to kill Huang Fulei. At this moment, 11 God Kings were gathered at the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. Of these 11 God Kings, 5 of them were sage emperors. As for the other 6, they were the Blood Sea Queen Shui Yin, the Azura Sea's 3 God Kings Sun Lian, Lu Lian and Ensun. There was also the Mount Blood Demon's God King Blood Demon Queen Yu Cha and Duan Muyu who stood far away. Whoosh! Before Jiang Lan arrived, the air had already started to vibrate. From this, one could tell how fast Jiang Lan was. Tang Lan, brother Mu Qin, the two of you, joined hands and blocked Jiang Lan. Duan Muyin stared at the ray of light that was rapidly flying toward them from afar. At the same time, he began to arrange via divine awareness voice transmission. Jianglan was, after all, only Jianglan. He was not the Azura God King, nor was he Qinyu. If the two sage emperors were to join hands, they would be able to block Jianglan. Moreover, there were other God Kings here. Let's not be anxious, Huang Fuyu said to Putai Hong beside him via divine awareness voice transmission. These two God Kings were on the same side. Attack! Duan Muyin suddenly shouted via divine awareness voice transmission. Tang Lan and Mu Qin's gazes immediately burst forth. The two of them turned into blurs. With a blue and cyan-colored energy, they rushed toward Jiang Lan. Mu Qin Tang Lan? Jiang Lan's gaze grew cold and sharp. The gauze feather blade beneath his feet disappeared. It then appeared in his hand. At this moment, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng had already arrived at the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel from the side. The two of them were both looking at Jiang Lan. According to their plan, it was still not time for them to attack. No matter what, they could only allow Jiang Lan to go and block the enemy by himself. Brother Jiang Lan, it's up to you. Yifeng was silently looking forward to it. As for Zhuo Qiulin, she was still cold and detached. Merely, her gaze had been fixed on Jiang Lan the entire time. Before the gazes of all the God Kings present, Jiang Lan began to fight against Mu Qin and Tang Lan. A dazzling blade ray. As if space and time were changing, before everyone's gazes, Jiang Lan's figure became fuzzy. The flow of time around him was violently changing unceasingly. At this moment, Jiang Lan's time acceleration had reached its pinnacle. Time acceleration can also be used to such a degree? The Blood Sea Queen, who was several hundred meters away, was shocked. Even though she had comprehended time stop, she had to admit that there was a large gap between her and Jiang Lan in terms of time acceleration. PFF. Chapter 663. Jiang Lan He, Tang Lan and Mu Qin both stopped abruptly. They turned around and looked to Jiang Lan's back. They were both shocked. Jiang Lan was most definitely stronger than them. However, regardless of how strong he was, when faced with two sage emperors joining hands, it was still impossible for him to escape that easily. This Jiang Lan, he clearly possessed the strength to fight against the two of us. However, even though he was seriously injured, he still did not slow down. Mu Qin and Tang Lan both knew very well what had happened. The two of them were not injured in the slightest. However, Jiang Lan was injured. Duan Muyin's expression changed. Faced with Jiang Lan, who was rushing toward him at a rapid speed with his aura reaching its peak, Duan Muyin felt a bit apprehensive. How could he possibly withstand Jiang Lan by himself? Right at this moment, Brother Duanmu, let's go together. Huang Fuyu's voice resounded in Duan Muyin's mind. Without any hesitation, Duan Muyin said, "Attack!" Huang Fuyu, Putai Hong and Duan Muyin were about to attack. However, at this moment, there was someone that attacked before them. A red-colored wave was rushing toward Jiang Lan. Retreat! Huang Fuyu, Putai Hong, and Duan Muyin all felt their hearts palpitate. Hua hua! The sound of flowing water was suddenly heard. Some flowers and grass fell from the sky and wrapped around the red waves. Huang Fuyu and the others immediately understood. Vast rivers and mountains. When Huang Fuyu, Duan Muyin, and the others besieged Zuoqiumei all those years ago, they had also pursued Yifeng to kill him. Yifeng had used the vast territory to delay those sage emperors and escaped with his life. The vast mountains and rivers were the spatial spiritual treasures. It could transform into bamboo, water, flowers, and trees. What happened? The Blood Sea Queen felt that her surroundings had suddenly changed. She had actually entered a space. Moreover, the restrictive power of this space was ridiculously strong. It wasn't that easy to break through. What is this? Why have I never heard of it before? The Blood Sea Queen's heart was filled with vexation and anger. Just as she was about to use time stop, Yifeng, who had been waiting by the side, immediately made his move. According to the original plan, Yifeng was to stall the Blood Sea Queen. While the Blood Sea Queen was very powerful, she did not possess an offensive first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. In order to breach the first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure vast territory, it would take a very long time. That amount of time was sufficient for Jiang Lan to escape. Brother Jiang Lan, I have helped you solve the greatest problem. Now it's up to the two of you, Yifeng said via divine awareness voice transmission. When Huang Fuyu, Putai Hong and Duan Muyin saw that the mysterious expert who had suddenly attacked was trapped by the vast territory, they immediately stopped hesitating. 3 origin spiritual pearls floated above their heads. They all rushed toward Jiang Lan. The 3 great sage emperors had joined hands to fight against Jiang Lan. If they failed again like this, the 3 saint emperors would not have the face to see anyone. However, whoosh whoosh, countless green willow branches covered the sky and rushed towards the 3 heavenly kings. There were so many of them that the 3 heavenly kings couldn't dodge in time and were bound by the countless branches. First-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure, 10,000 Willows. The reason why the scepter 10,000 Willows was called 10,000 Willows was because it had the ability to bind people. The God King of Death, Zhuo finally made her move. Break! Huang Fuyu, Duan Muyin and Putai Hong's expressions changed. However, the 3 of them immediately used their origin energy to break apart these willow branches. However, they had miscalculated. The first time they used their origin energy, they only managed to cause those willow branches to tremble slightly and not break apart. Humph, you want to break free from the bindings? How could it be that easy? Zhuo sneered. Soon after, a black light flashed through her eyes. Not good. Huang Fuyu, Duan Muyin and Putai Hong all felt a peculiar and strange energy coming from the countless branches. That energy was directly attacking their souls. Furthermore, it was clear that that energy was extremely proficient in attacking the soul. The attack that the God King of Death was most proficient in, combined with the scepter 10,000 Willows, it was simply perfect. Bang! The 3 heavenly kings all felt as if their souls had been bitten by insects. Merely, the origin spiritual pearls above the 3 heavenly kings' heads started to shine brightly. The 3 origin energies instantly reached a frightening level. The scepter 10,000 Willows immediately started to violently tremble. Humph, consider yourself lucky. Zhuo also felt that the scepter 10,000 Willows had reached its limit. To bind 3 heavenly kings at the same time, the pressure on the scepter 10,000 Willows was truly too great. However, in this period of time, Jiang Lan had already rushed into the relief sculpture tunnel from the side. Let's go. Yifeng took a glance at Zhuo. The 2 of them also rushed into the relief sculpture tunnel. As for Sun Lian, Lu Lian, and Sun and the Blood Demon Queen beside the relief sculpture tunnel, they did not stop them at all. Go, go. I'll let you all be happy for a while longer. And Sun saw the 3 of them disappear into the relief sculpture tunnel and displayed a smile on his face. And Sun Lian and Lu Lian did not stop them. That was because they knew very well that the Azura God King Luo Fan was waiting at the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. With the strength of the Azura God King Luo Fan, he was able to capture Jiang Lan and seize the back earth seal. Wouldn't that be an easy task? Bang! The countless flowers and plants in the sky suddenly disappeared. This was because Yifeng had retrieved his Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure Vast Territory. Once the Blood Sea Queen came out, she immediately looked to her surroundings. Merely Jiang Lan was no longer there. Where's Jiang Lan? The Blood Sea Queen Shui Yin looked to Sun with a cold gaze. Sun replied in a very cooperative manner. That Jiang Lan and them have already entered the relief sculpture tunnel. I'm afraid they're about to reach the other end. The Blood Sea Queen clenched her teeth. Scheming against others, yet being schemed against instead. The Blood Sea Queen had originally thought that those God Kings did not know her. Even if they knew her, they would likely not know of her current strength. The only God King that knew of her strength, Qinyu, was not present at this moment. Unfortunately, she did not know that Qinyu was able to observe everyone on the exalted celestial mountain through his cosmic spatial energy. Furthermore, he had informed Jiang Lan, Zhuo and Yifeng of her identity and strength. Scheming against the unsuspecting, how could the Blood Sea Queen not fail? The exalted celestial mountain was located on the surface of the endless Azura Sea. At the foot of the exalted celestial mountain, on the surface of the water at the exit of the relief sculpture tunnel, there was a small boat. On the small boat was a person. The temporal laws are indeed extremely profound. In the history of the divine realm, there were several people who managed to comprehend time stop. However, there was not a single person who managed to comprehend time reversal through their own abilities. The Azura God King Luo Fan sighed. Ever since he obtained the blue sky seal last time, Luo Fan had returned to his lair and set up a training ground that sped up time by 10,000 times. Although 10 years had passed in the outside world, Luo Fan had already studied the blue sky seal for close to 100,000 years. This blue sky seal contained a portion of the temporal laws. Among them, there was also a small portion regarding time reversal. However, due to the fact that the temporal laws contained within it were incomplete, especially the portion regarding time reversal, there was truly too little of it. Luo Fan was simply unable to comprehend time reversal through the blue sky seal. It's about time for them to come out. Luo Fan looked to the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. Luo Fan had actually set up a small barrier at the entrance of the relief sculpture tunnel. This barrier did not cause any harm to people. It also did not obstruct people in the slightest. However, once someone came out from the entrance, that barrier would automatically notify Luo Fan. At that time, Luo Fan would, as if it was a conditioned reflex, directly use time stop and freeze the person that obtained the back earth seal. Then he would openly take away the back earth seal. At this moment, Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng were rapidly running with one in front and two behind. It was simply impossible to fly in this relief sculpture tunnel. They could only run. The speed of the three of them was extremely fast. In a blink of an eye, they had arrived at the exit of the relief sculpture tunnel. We've arrived. Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng's eyes started to shine. We've finally succeeded. Yifeng was overjoyed. He directly said via divine awareness voice transmission, Brother Jiang Lan, God King Zhuo Qiulin, once we exit this exit, we are to immediately teleport back to the Purple Mystic Mansion. Do not hesitate in the slightest. I am worried that the Azura God King might be outside. It was extremely possible for the Azura God King to be outside. However, there was nothing that Jiang Lan and them could do about it. They could only rely on their reaction speed. Let's see if Jiang Lan and them could teleport faster, or if the Azura God King could use time stop. PFFF. Jiang Lan took the lead and rushed out of the relief sculpture tunnel's entrance. However, Jiang Lan did not know that right after he rushed to the entrance, a small barrier at the entrance had been activated. As for the Azura God King who was on the small boat, he did not hesitate at all and directly used it. Time stop. The waves of the Azura Sea suddenly stopped. Even the small boat that was drifting in the Azura Sea started to sway slightly. However, it no longer fell back down. At this moment, Jiang Lan had only just rushed out of the relief sculpture tunnel. Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng had also just stepped out of the entrance of the tunnel. Before they could even teleport, their figures were already stopped. They were unable to move at all. Damn it! Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng all felt that the situation was bad. At the same time, they were also cursing in their hearts. This Azura God King's reaction speed was truly too fast. However, even though they knew that this was the case, there was nothing that they could do. We've worked for others. Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng were filled with helplessness and anger. Back Earth Seal. At this moment, Luo Fan also stood up from the small boat. He looked to Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng with a smile on his face. Are you very upset? Are you very angry? However, it's useless. This Back Earth Seal is still mine. Luo Fan's body moved and floated toward Jiang Lan. Then, right when Luo Fan was excited, whoosh! Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng disappeared before his eyes. The Azura God King Luo Fan's pupils suddenly enlarged. He firmly stared ahead. How could this be? How could one teleport when time stop? Luo Fan was stunned. Suddenly, Luo Fan remembered a person. Qinyu, could it be Qinyu? Luo Fan could only think of Qinyu for such an unimaginable matter. When Qinyu was fighting against the four great god kings of the Thunder Punishment City, he was still able to teleport even after using spatial freezing. With merely this, one could deduce who it was. Furthermore, Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin, and Yifeng possessed an extraordinary relationship with Qin Yu. Other than Qin Yu, Luo Fan was unable to think of anyone else who possessed this sort of ability. Are you very upset? Very angry? However, it's useless. This back-earth seal is still ours. The exact same words that Luo Fan said earlier sounded in Luo Fan's mind. The Azura God King Luo Fan smiled helplessly. Sure enough, it's you, Qin Yu. However, I reckon that those sage emperors and god kings would not give up that easily. The Azura God King Luo Fan took a glance at the relief sculpture tunnel. At this moment, there were people rapidly rushing out from the relief sculpture tunnel. In front of the inner lake of the Purple Mystic Mansion, many people were gathered in front of the water screen to watch the battle on the exalted celestial mountain. The air trembled. Jiang Lan, Zhuo Qiulin and Yifeng appeared out of thin air. Jiang Lan and them were still trapped earlier. However, they had now arrived at the Purple Mystic Mansion. This sort of contrast caused the three of them to be endlessly joyous. They looked to their surroundings and knew that they had returned to the Purple Mystic Mansion. Little Yu, thank you. Jiang Lan looked to Qin Yu. Uncle Lan, you all should go and meditate in the new cosmos first. I have constructed a palace on the new cosmos Purple Mystic Stars, East Hazy Mountain, that allows time to accelerate by 100,000 times. You all should go there and comprehend this back-earth seal, Qin Yu said with a smile. According to the rules established by the three of us, this back-earth seal was first obtained by Jiang Lan. Thus, this back-earth seal shall be obtained by Jiang Lan. Zhuo Qiulin's hoarse voice sounded. Yifeng also nodded. In that case, Uncle Lan, you should hurry and study it, Qin Yu said with a smile. Qin Yu's tone also contained a trace of urging. That was because Qin Yu had already discovered that many god kings had rushed out from the relief sculpture tunnel. I'm afraid that those god kings will not give up, Jiang Lan said with a frown. Jiang Lan knew very well that if the back-earth seal was obtained by the Azura God King, then those god kings would likely be intimidated by the Azura God King's strength and not continue to chase after him. However, now, it was obtained by Jiang Lan. Although Jiang Lan's strength was powerful, he had not reached the level of being unrivaled like the Azura God King. Rest assured, Uncle Lan, you have me, Qin Yu said with a smile. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.